Bakura is a fascinating yet highly underrated character who deserves much more attention and appreciation. He is my absolute favorite character in all of fiction, which makes this video very important to me and meaningful as well. A comprehensive video on Bakura like this hasn't existed before and probably won't for a while. So one could consider this video as the ultimate Bakura video. Therefore, I'd appreciate it if you could support this passion project of mine by leaving a like, a comment, or even sharing it with others who are also interested in Yu-Gi-Oh! But that's enough for the introduction. Let's finally begin with the story of where Bakura's origins lie, namely in ancient Egypt with the Thief King Bakura.
千年リングが反応してやがる。やっぱり生きてやがったのか、王様よ。ようこそ俺様のふるさとへ。ここは俺様のフィールドだぜ。
Bakura was born in the small village of Kul Elna in Egypt, a place inhabited by royal tomb builders. These tomb builders were tasked with safeguarding the valuable belongings of the pharaohs, but over time they themselves turned into grave robbers. Bakura grew up in this environment, but his life was overshadowed by tragedy. He had to witness the priests of the pharaoh destroy the entire village and kill every inhabitant to create the Millennium items. Among the victims were of course Bakura's family and friends. These traumatic experiences left deep scars on his soul and fueled his unrelenting hatred towards the royal family. However, the trauma didn't just leave emotional scars, but also a prominent physical scar on Bakura's face. While we don't know exactly how he got it, one can imagine that the early days of the Thief King were far less skilled than his later achievements. After all, everyone starts small. I can envision two scenarios for the scar's origin. First, the innocent young Bakura who had lost everything around him would naturally have had to find some way to acquire food, and this basic need might have been the first step towards becoming a thief. As an inexperienced boy, stealing bread or fruit likely wouldn't have gone smoothly. This scenario is reflected in the Dark Side of Dimensions film, with Diva and Sarah who struggle to avoid punishment in a more civilized Egypt. Considering that Bakura lived in war-torn ancient Egypt, it's easy to imagine that he might have been attacked with a spear or something similar as punishment. Alternatively, Bakura might have had an easier start to his thief life thanks to Diabound, but perhaps overconfidence led him to attempt to plunder the tomb of Atem's father, Aknam Kanon, at a young age. The question will then arise whether the priests were merciful enough to punish such an affront with just a permanent facial wound. Given the harsh times, this seems less likely. Personally, I find the first scenario to be the most plausible. Now that we are on the subject of Bakura's life as a thief, I'd like to bring up something interesting from Yu-Gi-Oh! Creator Kazuki Takahashi. In July of 2020, he developed a concept for a game called Bakura. In this game, all 4 players randomly draw one of the following roles: the thief, the pharaoh, the priest, and the seer. None of the players are allowed to know which role the others have. A pyramid is placed in the center of the board with 7 Millennium balls hidden on it. The objective is to bring the balls to your own base, protecting them while stealing from others. However, players must beware of being deceived by Bakura. This is a clever strategy game based on the Thief King's goal of stealing the 7 Millennium items, while others try to stop him. I think it's wonderful that Kazuki Takahashi, 16 years after completing his story, created a game dedicated to Bakura. I can't help but wonder what the finished game would have looked like. But that's enough about the game, let's return to Bakura's story. To Bakura, the pharaoh symbolizes power and oppression, a king who took whatever he wanted. In his eyes, a king's essence was someone who robbed others. Thus, Bakura decided to become the king of thieves, the king of kings, with the goal of stealing the world and destroying the existing order. The deep hatred in Bakura's heart manifested itself in the form of Diabound, a powerful being that perfectly reflected his will and dark ambitions. Diabound was an embodiment of Bakura's thirst for vengeance and his determination to annihilate the royal family. This is evident in Diabound's abilities. It can absorb the powers of those it defeats and phase through walls, enabling Bakura to infiltrate any place without difficulty. Bakura's first major attack was the theft of the tomb of Atem's father, Aknam Kanon. He not only stole the precious treasures, but also took the pharaoh's corpse with him, blaming him for the creation of the Millennium items. These items were the key to Bakura's revenge. Bakura boldly confronted Pharaoh Atem and his priests, demanding all the Millennium items which held immense power. The priests, including Mahado, Shadar and Aknadin, were shocked by the darkness and hatred burning within Bakura's soul. His goal was clear: vengeance for his cruel past and the destruction of those responsible. Until the priests realized that Diabound was not inherently evil but a reflection of Bakura's own soul, Bakura posed a thought-provoking question: what is good and what is evil? Is something only good if it aligns with the priest's rules? Bakura argued that humans were incapable of recognizing true justice, which he believed was the role of the Millennium items. Bakura waged a fierce battle against the priests. His objective was to shatter Atem's sense of justice and make him realize that everyone harbors darkness that can destroy them from within. Bakura was so powerful that he nearly killed all 6 priests using Diabound, but Atem managed to stop him with the power of the god Obelisk. Shortly afterward, Bakura waited for the right moment to direct his wrath at Mahado, the most powerful magician and guardian of the Millennium Ring. Mahado tried to lure Bakura into a trap, warning him that the ring's immense magical energy could destroy an unworthy bearer. However, Bakura made it clear that no trap in the world could harm him, as he, the king of thieves, knew how to counter any trap. Using Mahado's traps against him, Bakura ultimately killed him, claiming the Millennium Ring without visible difficulty. This demonstrated Bakura's enormous power and unwavering will. Absorbing the ring's dark energy, Bakura grew even stronger, reveling in the suffering of those he defeated. Bakura pursued his plans for revenge and turned his focus to Aknadin, the main perpetrator of the Kul Elna massacre. Through the power of the Millennium Ring, Diabound acquired a new ability perfectly suited for the Thief King, the ability to merge with darkness, rendering both Bakura and Diabound invisible. Bakura used this power to approach Aknadin unnoticed. He didn't just want to kill Aknadin, he wanted to inflict the same pain he had endured. Using the Millennium Ring, Bakura sealed a part of his soul into Aknadin's Millennium Eye and began manipulating him to destroy his own kingdom. This led to a direct confrontation with Pharaoh Atem. With the power of the Millennium Ring and Diabound's abilities, Bakura exploited the darkness to his advantage. Diabound's ability to merge with shadows enabled him to battle Atem and his god Osiris. The souls of Kul Elna, trapped in the Millennium items, thirsted for revenge, and Bakura sought to wield this vengeance to gain the power of the god of darkness and steal the world. His victory over the pharaoh brought him closer to his goal, as he seized the Millennium Pendant, the symbol of Egypt's ruler. From that point on, Bakura waited patiently for the priests to come to him in Kul Elna. He positioned himself atop the stone where the Millennium items were forged from the bodies of his people, gathering the restless spirits for his ultimate act of vengeance. In an epic battle against the pharaoh and his 5 priests, Bakura overpowered them, obtaining the Millennium Key and scales, which further increased his strength. However, despite his overwhelming power, Bakura was eventually outwitted by the united efforts of the priests. With his last breath, Bakura placed the Millennium items into the Millennium Stone, where they were meant to rest for eternity. Though Bakura died, his darkness lived on. The fragment of his soul sealed in Aknadin collected the remaining Millennium items from the priests, placed them into the stone, and resurrected the great evil god Zorc, fulfilling Bakura's ultimate revenge. Thus ended the tragic yet successful story of the Thief King Bakura. He could have lived a peaceful life as a simple boy if the world's darkness hadn't been so vast. Because of his darkness, his ancestors lost their status as royal tomb builders. They were forced to live as worthless grave robbers to survive and ultimately became sacrifices in the war-driven world. So the so-called righteous could enforce their version of justice. This mirrors to some extent the modern version of Bakura, but we'll discuss that later. First, let's delve into Zorc, who plays a major role in the lives of every Bakura, thereby concluding the chapter of ancient Egypt.
いでよ大邪神ゾーク
我に盾つくとはなんと愚かな。我が力の前には何者も無力。
Unlike many other gods in Yu-Gi-Oh! Who are clearly based on Egyptian deities, Zorc is a bit more mysterious. There's no obvious connection between him and a specific Egyptian god. But what's really interesting is the possible link to Greek mythology. The name Necrophades could be a combination of two Greek words. Necro, meaning death, and Hades, the Greek god of the underworld. This already makes Zorc quite special, because while Yu-Gi-Oh! Is heavily influenced by Egyptian mythology, Zorc breaks this rule and offers an unexpected link to Greek mythology. This also fits well with his character, as Zorc is described in the series as the Lord of the Underworld, a title usually assigned to Hades. It's almost as if Zorc was given elements from another mythology to create an ultimate villain who was more ancient than the Egyptian gods. This gives him a unique place within the world of Yu-Gi-Oh!, making him a character that goes beyond the typical boundaries of good and evil. You could say that Zorc doesn't just represent evil, he also embodies the deepest fears and inevitable darkness that have existed in every culture and era. Zorc's origin story is dark and fascinating. He was created from humanity's own darkness, a kind of reflection of the negative energy lying dormant in people's hearts. And instead of lessening this darkness, Zorc only amplified it. He became, so to speak, the engine of evil in the world, drawing out humanity's darkest instincts and driving people to the most extreme means, such as wars and destruction. A key figure in Zorc's story is the mysterious Millennium script. Zorc may have created the Book of the Millennium script, an ancient manuscript that served as a guide to creating the Millennium items. These items, like the Millennium Ring and the Millennium Puzzle, are infused with dark magic that allows their holders to make pacts with dark spirits from the beyond. It's heavily implied that Zorc planned all this, intending one day to be freed by someone who carries the necessary darkness within. This book, the Millennium script, has existed since times that were considered ancient, even 3000 years ago. It was the cause of many bloody wars in ancient Egypt, and all this could have been part of Zorc's plan to increase chaos and darkness in the world. Perhaps he wanted to shape a specific person, someone like Akhenaten, who was corrupted by darkness and willing to create the Millennium items that would bring Zorc's power into the world. Zorc knew he had to be patient until the time was right and someone with enough darkness in their heart emerged to fulfill his plan. Zorc was not just a passive dark force operating in the background. He had a direct influence on some of the most important characters in the series, pulling the strings to achieve his goals. Take Akhenaten for example, the first to decipher the Millennium script. Akhenaten's own darkness led him to create the Millennium items, and in the process he sacrificed the villagers of Kul Elna to bring Zorc's power into the world. This shows just how deep Zorc's influence reached. He was able to turn an otherwise powerful and honorable priest into a tool for his dark plans. But Akhenaten wasn't the only one Zorc manipulated. Zorc also used Bakura to gather the Millennium items and unleash his power. What's special here is that this plan worked out because Bakura was himself so deeply consumed by darkness due to the massacre in Kul Elna. Bakura's own dark nature brought out by Zorc made him the perfect tool for Zorc's plans. Akhenaten finally completed his connection to Zorc when he managed to unite all the Millennium items in the Stone of the Underworld. Through this action, he made a pact with Zorc, receiving a portion of Zorc's soul and his immense power. This turned Akhenaten into the High Priest of Darkness, who pursued Zorc's goals further. Zorc's ultimate goal was to cover the world in absolute darkness, plunging humanity into the chaos they had themselves created by bringing Zorc into existence. Humanity therefore was responsible for their own damnation. It's almost as if Zorc had no other motive but destruction. He was a manifestation of pure negativity that existed in people's hearts, and that's exactly what makes him so fascinating. Zorc exists because humans carry darkness within them. He's a reflection of their deepest fears, greed and hatred. Without these dark emotions, Zorc might have never existed. Zorc skillfully knew how to harness the darkness in people's heart and shape it to his ends. He was not simply an embodiment of evil, but a manipulator who understood how to exploit people's weaknesses and dark tendencies to his advantage. In a way, Zorc was less of a monster and more of an idea. The idea that evil always lurks in darkness. Zorc didn't just want to bring about chaos and destruction, he wanted people to face their own darkness and break because of it. This can be a profound and unsettling concept when you think about it. Zorc isn't simply a villain who wants to rule the world, he is the evil that lies dormant in every person, just waiting to be unleashed. At this point in the story, things get a bit unclear as we only experience a fragmented version of the past through flashbacks. What we do know for sure is that the High Priest of Darkness raised an army of monsters and spirits that fought against the Pharaoh and his priests. One of the Pharaoh's most important allies in this battle was the Egyptian god Obelisk, but even he struggled to stand against the combined power of Zorc and his unleashed army. These dark spirits and monsters were a direct manifestation of Zorc's dark power and seemed almost unstoppable. Another decisive moment in the story was when the High Priest of Darkness managed to control priest Seto. He succeeded in killing Kisara, the woman Seto loved, in order to break Seto's will and summon the legendary White Dragon. This dragon was supposed to be powerful enough to defeat the Pharaoh. However, the dragon proved uncontrollable and slipped from the High Priest's control, ultimately leading to his downfall. In the end, the Pharaoh attempt managed to seal the High Priest's soul along with his own in the Millennium pendant. This pendant was shattered, which led to the creation of the legendary Millennium puzzle. This puzzle played a central role in the story, but what happened to Zorc's main body up to that point remains unclear. We don't see him in any of the flashbacks, suggesting that he may have temporarily been forgotten. Another interesting aspect of the story is the connection between Zorc and Bakura. Both Zorc and the Thief King Bakura managed to seal a part of their souls in the Millennium Ring. This act allowed Zorc to be reborn in the modern world, taking on the role of Yami Bakura. This reincarnation took place about 3000 years later, when young Ryou Bakura took hold of the Millennium Ring. Yami Bakura's ultimate goal was to gather all the Millennium items in the modern world and revive Zorc once again. This led to the dramatic events in which Yami Bakura ultimately played the Millennium World RPG with the Pharaoh. In this game, the memories of Zorc and the Pharaoh replayed, and Zorc nearly succeeded in returning to the modern world. Ultimately, however, Zorc was permanently destroyed by the creator goddess of light, Horakti. An important point here is that although Zorc himself was completely annihilated, the darkness in the Millennium items did not entirely disappear. This becomes clear in the movie Dark Side of Dimensions, where we see that the character Diva is consumed by the darkness of the Millennium Ring. He transforms into a demonic figure that somewhat resembles Zorc. This shows that Zorc's influence lives on in the modern world even after his final death, and that his dark powers still exist in the world. Before we get to the abilities of Zorc Necrophades, I want to talk about his appearance, which can look a bit odd to many. Why does the core of evil and darkness have with a dragon between his legs that makes him look strange. We actually have an explanation from Kazuki Takahashi, and it's somewhat tragic. When Takahashi reached the last arc, he realized his health was deteriorating bit by bit. Many of you probably already know this, but for those who don't, being a mangaka who has to create a complete manga chapter week after week for years puts immense physical and mental pressure on them, causing some to break down repeatedly. And with Kazuki Takahashi it was no different. He talked about how toward the end he couldn't think clearly, struggled with dizziness and confused thoughts, and on top of that he was coughing up a significant amount of blood daily, which only made things harder on his body. You could say he couldn't complete the final arc with a clear mind, which only shows how strong a person he was, because he managed to finish that masterfully anyway. But yes, Takahashi had to go to the hospital for those reasons, where he found out that he was missing about a third of the blood in his body, which of course explained the entire problem. So after finally reviewing the last arc with a clear mind, Takahashi realized that Zorc's design was somewhat off and could be misinterpreted. For the re-release of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, he modified all the panels featuring Zorc so that the dragon head would wrap around Zorc's body, which definitely improved the design. I love this dedication that Takahashi puts into his work, the extra effort he made just so we could fully enjoy it. But that's enough for Zorc's character design, let's move on to Zorc's abilities. Zorc Necrophades was a being of unimaginable power, far surpassing many other antagonists in the Yu-Gi-Oh series. From his very resurrection, he left no doubt about his destructive intentions. He spoke of an utter darkness that would descend upon Earth, of people succumbing to fear and ultimately facing death. In one of his power-driven speeches, Zorc declared, "The skies will be shrouded in black clothes and the earth will be crowned in terror. A single beat of my wings will strip flesh from the bone and a breath of my lungs will reduce their bones to dust." These words made clear that Zorc's power was aimed at complete annihilation and plunging the world into chaos and darkness. A key element of his power was his influence over the so-called Ka, the soul monsters. Zorc was the origin of these beings, which play a crucial role in the series, as they could be summoned and controlled by their bearers, a reference to the modern duel monsters. Additionally, the Millennium items, which are also central to the Yu-Gi-Oh universe, stem directly from Zorc's dark power. These items enabled their holders to make pacts with the spirits from the beyond and gain immeasurable power. Through the dark forces of these relics, it was also possible to summon the dark souls of the deceased as an army capable of battling the god Obelisk. One particularly remarkable and unusual ability of Zorc was his control over time. During the Millennium World RPG, Zorc shows that he is able to rewind time. This power appeared to be limited to this particular world, but later Yami Bakura hints that this ability was indeed Zorc's own, and that he could potentially use it in other realms as well. This suggests that Zorc could rewind and even halt time at will. There's even a hint that Zorc might have had the power to speed up Earth's time, causing the planet to collapse under his dominion. Though this point remains open to interpretation, it demonstrates how complex Zorc's abilities truly are. Interestingly, Zorc faces a counterpart of sorts, Hassan, also known as Shardi. Hassan claims to be the direct counterpart to Zorc. He explains that as long as light exists in the world, Zorc will always cast a shadow, and that shadow is Hassan himself, functioning as a kind of protective force. Hassan's power is said to mirror Zorc's, as he represents a reflection of his darkness. However, as it turns out, Zorc's power is so overwhelming that even in a weakened form he was able to defeat Hassan. Ultimately, control over all shadows and darkness is indeed stronger than a mere shadow. Things get even more interesting when the High Priest of Darkness, who received his power from Zorc, enters the story. The High Priest sees himself as a reflection of Zorc's might, making him stronger than Hassan. In the story, the High Priest was able to revive an army of the undead, so powerful that even the Egyptian priests could not defeat them. This undead army was an impressive demonstration of the dark power Zorc could unleash. The High Priest's strength was so immense that even Hassan was shocked by the seemingly limitless power Zorc had bestowed upon his servant. Zorc demonstrated his might in multiple battles. A memorable moment was when he deflected an attack from the dark magician Mahado, who had previously defeated Bakuras Diabond, a monster capable of taking on the Egyptian gods. Yet Mahado's attack inflicted only minor burns on Zorc's fingers, underscoring Zorc's overwhelming power. In response, Zorc swung his arm, creating a massive shockwave that killed Priest Shadar instantly. This shows that Zorc not only possessed powerful magical abilities, but was also capable of inflicting devastating physical damage. Shimon, the wisest of the priests, saw no other option but to summon Exodia, the most powerful entity known at that time after the Pharaoh's gods. Exodia was able to obliterate the undead army in an instant and focused all its power on an attack against Zorc. Shimon even sacrificed his own soul as fuel for Exodia's assault, but even that wasn't enough to defeat Zorc. Zorc simply mocked the attack, declaring that no flame in the world could brighten his darkness. He then unleashed his powerful Dark Phenomenon attack, which effortlessly tore through Exodia's beam and sliced Exodia in half. Throughout the story, Zorc appears to be virtually invincible. The only way to stop him was to seal him away, as the Pharaoh once did. Alternatively, it would require the Pharaoh's power and his true name. This pivotal moment finally came when the Pharaoh summoned Horakti, the creator goddess of light. Only through her supernatural divine power could Zorc be permanently erased from existence, or so it was believed. A portion of Zorc's power remained through the High Priest, who was eventually defeated by Kisara and the White Dragon. The White Dragon, also known as the Blue Eyes White Dragon, was considered the most powerful creature the world had seen up to that point, underscoring the level of power it took to end the manifestation of humanity's darkness.
あるよパパ。俺様がこの世界を暗黒に染めてやるよ。
Let's move on to the story of the modern Bakuras. Ryou Bakura is a quiet and kind character whose life is overshadowed by dark forces. Let's take a deeper look at his tragic childhood and the grim events that tie him to the malevolent Yami Bakura. From the loss of family members to the awakening of an ancient evil spirit, Ryou Bakura's story is one of the darkest in the entire Yu-Gi-Oh universe. Let's begin. Not much is known about Bakura's childhood, but what we do know is marked by deep tragedy. Even before the main story begins, Bakura lost his younger sister Amane in a car accident. It's very likely that his mother also died in the same accident. This devastating loss profoundly shaped Bakura, leading him to develop the habit of writing letters to his deceased sister and mother in the afterlife as a way to stay connected with his lost loved ones. After this loss, Bakura lived alone with his father, who was deeply absorbed in his interest in ancient Egyptian artifacts. It almost seems as if the Thief King's greed persisted into modern times, as Bakura's father owns the Dominum Museum and spent much of his time expanding his collection of ancient treasures. While Bakura struggled with the grief of losing his family, his father seems more focused on archaeology. One pivotal moment in Bakura's childhood occurred when his father traveled to Egypt to find the Millennium Ring, a relic that would forever alter Bakura's fate. Although Bakura's father thought he had traveled alone, Bakura secretly followed him. They arrived at the village of Kul Elna, the birthplace of the Millennium items. Bakura's father had one goal: to obtain the Millennium Ring. His gaze was immediately fixed on the artifact, while Bakura shyly observed from the background, a parallel to the Thief King Bakura, who similarly stood in the shadows as he witnessed the devastating power of Zorc centuries ago. Bakura watched as his father offered Shadi, the guardian of the Millennium items, a large sum of money to purchase the ring. But Shadi, knowing that the Millennium items choose their owners, allowed Bakura's father to try it on. This revealed the true power of the ring, which violently repelled Bakura's father and seriously injured him. Once again, a tragic parallel to the past emerged. Just as the Thief King saw a powerful dark force endanger his family, Bakura witnessed the same peril in modern times. Frightened and worried, Bakura rushed to his father, but his father barely noticed him. Completely consumed by the allure of the Millennium Ring, he seemed indifferent to his son's present, not even surprised to see him, despite thinking he had traveled to Egypt alone. Desperate to gain his father's attention, Bakura reached for the ring to bring it to him. This was the moment that sealed Ryou Bakura's fate forever. The ring immediately reacted to Bakura, choosing him as its new bearer. At that instant, the dark soul of Zorc Necrophadus was reborn after 3000 years in the form of Yami Bakura. Without hesitation, Yami Bakura used his newfound freedom to attack Shardi and the Prana, an ancient group of balance keepers who had been involved in Zorc's sealing. Yami Bakura harbored a deep grudge against Shardi and was determined to eliminate him, ultimately leading to Shardi's death. After carrying out his attack, Yami Bakura declared his dark intentions to plunge the world back into darkness. He then disappeared into the shadows. This was the last memory Bakura had of that night. A night so traumatic that he had completely suppressed it. What happened to his father remains uncertain. Two possible scenarios exist. Either Bakura's father survived the ordeal and returned to run the Domino Museum, or he succumbed to the dark power of the ring, as those not chosen by the Millennium item are often doomed. Evidence for his survival includes Yami Bakura's later remark that Bakura's father owns the museum, suggesting he is still alive. However, it could also imply ownership in a legal sense, regardless of his death. Personally, I believe Bakura's father died that day. The limited information we have about Bakura's childhood reveals that loneliness was a central aspect of his life. In the Toei anime, also known as Season 0, we learn that Bakura deeply wished for real friends. His isolation and the loss of his family left him yearning for human connection. This longing for friendship, however, was cruelly exploited by Yami Bakura. In the manga, Bakura's desire is portrayed slightly differently. He wanted to always be able to play with his friends. For Bakura, playing games served as an escape from reality, a way to cope with grief and loneliness. That's why role-playing games were likely his favorite. He didn't have to confront himself, but could adopt a persona of a fictional character. Unfortunately, Yami Bakura twisted even this innocent wish. In his malevolent logic, Yami Bakura interpreted Bakura's desire by literally turning his friends into game pieces, ensuring that Bakura could play with them forever. This cruel deception traumatized Bakura further regarding friendships. However, this trauma began to heal when he transferred to Domino High School, marking the start of his story in the manga.
ヒューギ君、ここへ来ちゃいけない。バクラ君、みんなで来ちゃった。ようこそ。みんな来てくれて嬉しいよ。
Bakura is introduced as a new student in Yugi's class, having recently moved to Domino City. He is seated next to Jonochi and the two quickly become friends. Bakura is polite and friendly to everyone, but remains somewhat reserved. Jonochi introduces him to the rest of the group, including Yugi, Anzu and Honda. Bakura and Yugi form a bond quickly as they share a passion for games. Bakura loves games, especially board games and tabletop RPGs. His favorite game is Monster World, and he is delighted to discover that Yugi is also familiar with it. The two connect over their shared enthusiasm. Jonochi suggests that the entire group play Monster World together the next day, since the others haven't played it before. Although Bakura agrees, there's a hint of concern in his voice. This reaction stems from the fact that he previously lost his friends through gaming and fears that this tragic fate might repeat itself. During their conversation, Bakura shows interest in Yugi's Millennium puzzle, asking if he can examine it more closely. Yugi hands it over without hesitation. However, when Bakura holds the puzzle, something strange happens. He feels a sudden shock and experiences severe chest pain. Unbeknownst to everyone, Bakura's Millennium Ring resonates with the Millennium puzzle. Both items contain fragments of Zorc's soul, which likely caused this reaction. Bakura tries to brush off the pain, but it's evident that something significant has occurred. Meanwhile, Bakura attracts considerable attention at school, particularly from the girls. Several of them develop crushes on him, following him everywhere, and even form a fan club dedicated to him. While many can sympathize with their admiration, Bakura finds it overwhelming and admits that he is not good at dealing with girls. He longs for peace and solitude during these moments. Yugi and Jonouchi remark that Bakura seems like a genuinely kind person and would make a great friend. In fact, Bakura develops a strong connection with Yugi's group in the manga, a dynamic not as prominent in the anime. Consequently, some fans don't view Bakura as core part of the group, but in the manga he unquestionably is. Shortly after his arrival, Bakura has his first encounter with Mr. Karita, the school's gym teacher. This highlights the misfortune Bakura often faces. Mr. Karita reprimands Bakura for his long hair and for being seen with a group of girls, demanding that he cut his hair by the next day to look like a boy. Additionally, Mr. Karita mentions rumors from Bakura's previous school, specifically the mysterious disappearance of his friends after playing games with him, a dark hint at Yami Bakura's influence. However, Bakura doesn't seem particularly troubled by this and retreats to the bathroom for some quiet. There, he complains about the lingering chest pain. Suddenly, he hears Yami Bakura's laughter in his mind, though he can't yet identify its source. Later, Bakura and Yugi discuss their plans to play Monster World. Bakura tells Yugi that while he would love to join, he is afraid of losing his friends again. He admits that all his previous friends fell unconscious and have remained in a coma since playing games with him. This was the reason Bakura has had to change schools multiple times, now living alone in an apartment far from his family. Bakura advises Yugi and the others to keep their distance. It's worth noting that Bakura mentions having distanced himself from his family. This could imply that his father is still alive, but it could also mean that he deliberately moved away from the home where his deceased family once lived. Bakura believes in the occult and might think that the spirits of his lost loved ones are still around him, spirits he doesn't want to burden with his curse. That same evening, Yami Bakura finally establishes direct contact with Bakura. He explains that the resonance between the Millennium Ring and the Millennium Puzzle has enabled them to communicate. Yami Bakura reveals that he has waited 3,000 years to find the Millennium Puzzle again, which contains fragments of both his soul and that of the Pharaoh. He also hints that the Pharaoh serves as one of the guardians of the tomb, while he himself is the grave robber, foreshadowing the events of ancient Egypt later revealed in the series. Yami Bakura further claims that he has already fulfilled Bakura's deepest wishes by turning his friends into game pieces. This dark act allowed Bakura to play with his friends in a twisted sense. Yami Bakura also promises to punish Mr. Karita, which he indeed does. The same night, we see Yami Bakura visiting Mr. Karita at school to deliver his punishment. He transforms him into a Monster World game piece, intending to use him as a pawn in the upcoming battle with Yugi and his friends. This demonstrates that Yami Bakura serves as a dark reflection of Yugi. Just as Yugi houses a spirit in the Millennium Puzzle who punishes wrongdoers, Bakura carries a spirit in the Millennium Ring. Both children are innocent, yet the Millennium items they bear contain ancient warriors who fought a war thousands of years ago. These parallels highlight Bakura's central role in the story of Yu-Gi-Oh! The next day, Bakura doesn't show up at school. He wants to protect his friends from danger, but Yugi, Jonouchi, Anzu and Honda grow concerned and visit him at his home. When they arrive, Bakura tries to warn them to not enter. However, before he can finish his sentence, Yami Bakura takes full control and invites them in to play Monster World. What follows is a dark shadow game, where Yami Bakura reveals that he is willing to do whatever it takes to unleash his power. The Monster World campaign is a deeply symbolic prelude to the events of the Millennium World arc. The game tells the story of a peaceful village attacked by the Dark Lord Zorc, who kills the king and transforms the castle into a source of evil, summoning more and more monsters to gradually destroy the village. This dark narrative mirrors the horrors Zorc would have unleashed in ancient Egypt if he had defeated Pharaoh Atem. It's an ominous foreshadowing of later revelations motivations in the story. The Monster World campaign also offers brilliant parallels to the Millennium World arc. Yami Bakura frequently assumes false identities while hiding his true nature as Zorc. In Monster World, he introduces a mysterious cocooned figure, whose face hints at Yami Bakura's true nature. This figure appears to side with the heroes, but later reveals himself as the Dark Master Zorc. This setup mirrors Bakura's role in the broader story. He enters as a seemingly innocent new character, becomes part of the core group, and ultimately emerges as the final antagonist and reincarnation of darkness. Just as in ancient Egypt, Yami Bakura's darkness is countered by his own shadow side. In Egypt, this role was fulfilled by Shardi, also known as Hassan, who sacrificed himself to save the pharaoh. In the Monster World campaign, it's Ryou Bakura who steps into this role. His soul actively opposes Yami Bakura, showing an incredible willingness to sacrifice himself to protect his friends. As the game progresses, it becomes clear that it is a shadow game, where the protagonist's souls are transferred into their game pieces. This is the original version of the duel between Yugi and Bakura later seen in the Duelist Kingdom arc, where the friends are turned into their favorite cards instead of game pieces. At the climax of the game, the players manage to sever one of Zorc's arms. Since Yami Bakura is linked to Zorc, this reveals Ryou Bakura's determination to fight back. He manipulates the game to place Yami Bakura at a disadvantage, typing on the computer and declaring his intention to protect his friends. Yami Bakura is shocked by Ryou Bakura's strength of will, despite having buried his soul deep within the subconscious. To retaliate, Yami Bakura injures Ryou Bakura by stabbing his hand, demonstrating how much Ryu's resistance pressures him. Despite Yami Bakura's claim to protect his host vessel, he harms Bakura to maintain control. However, Ryou Bakura summons his own game piece, the White Magician Bakura, into the game. This figure aids Yugi and the others, temporarily halting Zorc's advance. The game culminates in a crucial dice roll between Yami Bakura and Atem. Yami Bakura seals a fragment of his soul into the dice to ensure the best possible roll. Yet Ryou Bakura intervenes again, sacrificing his own soul to counter Yami Bakura, declaring that he will no longer lose any friends. Ryou Bakura bids them farewell, smiling as he dies for the chance to play a game with his friends without harm befalling them. Atem ultimately wins the game, forcing Yami Bakura back into the Millennium Ring. However, Atem notices that the Ryou Bakura has truly died. The White Mage Bakura, a manifestation of Ryu's soul, sacrifices itself to restore Ryu's life. This act requires Atem to roll double zeros, a symbolic action realized through the power of friendship. The White Mage Bakura bids farewell, promising to reunite with the group in the future to play Monster World again, starting anew as a level 1 character. This marks a fresh chapter in Bakura's life. Thanks to the healing magic Luanazun, Ryou Bakura is revived. Despite the terrible events, the friends are able to celebrate a happy ending. A few days later, we learn that all the people who fell into a coma due to Yami Bakura's influence have regained consciousness. Bakura's injured hand, which Yami Bakura stabbed, has also fully healed. It's unclear whether this recovery was due to the White Mage Bakura's magic or Bakura's own resilience. Meanwhile, Bakura has been working on a special project. He reveals a diorama he crafted, depicting the entire group, Yugi, Atem, Anzu, Honda, Jonuchi, and Bakura himself as Monster World figurines. Each figure contains small references to the adventure they share. Bakura described the diorama as a symbol of their friendship, expressing a desire to play Monster World together again someday. For the first time in his life, Bakura has friends he can trust. He feels confident playing games with them without fearing that his curse will harm them. This marks the first time the Millennium Ring's dark influence has been broken. Just as Zorc was defeated by the power of friendship and unity, Bakura Bakura's curse was similarly lifted. With this, Bakuras Story before the Duelist Kingdom arc concludes. It's easy to imagine Bakura continuing to play Monster World with his friends in the meantime, fulfilling his deepest wish to be with his friends and play his favorite games. It's also worth mentioning Bakura's genuine love for games. Kazuki Takahashi once noted in a data book that upon arriving at Domino High School, Bakura quickly attracted a crowd of girls. However, he was far more interested in games than in romance. Bakura loved immersing himself in an imaginary world of his own creation, where he could grow and develop. There's also a humorous twist. Bakura has a huge ego when it comes to games, especially adventure and board games, considering himself an undefeated champion. As the saying goes, soft on the outside, tough on the inside. This mirrors the Thief King, who made playful gaming references in ancient Egypt. But enough about that, let's move on to the Duelist Kingdom, the arc where we first meet Bakura in the Duel Monsters anime.
俺は7つの千年アイテムを集めてるんだ。お前知ってるか？全てが揃えば世界を支配できるほどのパワーを手に入れられるんだぜ。
In the Duelist Kingdom arc, the anime diverges significantly from the manga, especially regarding Bakura's role. While Bakura is integrated into the friend group in the manga and plays an active role, in the anime he mostly stays in the background. In the manga, Bakura learns about Jonochi's invitation to the tournament and the story behind his sister's condition, prompting him to join the journey to support his friends. In the anime, however, Bakura is simply shown wandering the Duelist Kingdom until he happens to encounter the group? I don't know. Bakura has his own goals during this arc. He is particularly curious about Pegasus after Jonochi reveals that he possesses the Millennium Eye. Bakura's interest in the mystery of the Millennium items drives him to participate. He hopes Pegasus can answer questions about their origin and how they function and their true purpose. To underline his curiosity, Bakura reveals his own Millennium ring to his friends. Shocking them, he explains that he carries it but doesn't wear it, hoping to avoid the dangers associated with it. He claims his father acquired the ring from an antique dealer in Egypt. However, as we later learn in the Dark Side of Dimensions, Bakura has repressed the true events of that day. The traumatic experience caused him to misremember, believing his father purchased the ring and gave it to him as a gift. Knowing the connection between his ring, the Millennium puzzle and the other Millennium items, Bakura is determined to uncover the truth behind these artifacts. This motivation aligns with Yami Bakura's hints of wanting to claim the Millennium items for himself, strengthening Bakura's resolve to join the Duelist Kingdom. Throughout the journey, Bakura plays a supportive role. He helps where he can, often using his knowledge and caution to aid the group. For example, when Jonochi tries to challenge Mai and Ryuzaki, Bakura warns him that they are on a completely different level. Bakura also serves as the group's walking clock, as he is the only one with a wristwatch and is frequently asked for the time, a small detail he uses to flex his Rolex at every opportunity. After a long day, the group makes a campfire. Bakura is particularly happy to spend time camping with Yugi and casually mentions that he's a good cook, which makes sense since he lives alone and prepares his own meals. During this time in the anime, there's a duel between Bakura and Yugi, which serves as a replacement for the Monster World arc. The anime adds a thoughtful detail. Bakura chooses the card Change of Heart as his favorite card. This choice represents his dual nature, a peaceful soul influenced by a dark power. The card's effect, allowing a monster to switch sides, symbolizes not only Bakura's inner conflict with Zorc, but also his determination to free himself from darkness and join the group. In this sense, Change of Heart represents not only Ryou Bakura, but also Yami Bakura and the Thief King of ancient Egypt. Later, Bakura notices that his Millennium ring points towards Pegasus Castle, an indication that another Millennium item is located there. He mentions that this is the second time the ring has activated on its own. The first time was when he arrived at Domino High School and the ring pointed towards Yugi and the Millennium puzzle. This connection between the Millennium items intrigues him further. However, Yugi warns Bakura not to wear the ring under any circumstances, and Bakura promises not to, though we know how this promise eventually turns out. Sometime later, Bakura defends Jonouchi against Kaiba when the latter condescendingly comments on Jonouchi's participation in the tournament. Bakura points out that Jonouchi is doing all this for his sick sister and tries to make Kaiba reflect on his own actions. However, Jonouchi interrupts Bakura, stating that he doesn't care about Kaiba's opinion and that it doesn't matter to him. Still, this moment shows Bakura's loyalty and that he is willing to stand up for his friends, even though he has only recently joined the group. On their way through the maze of the Meikyu brothers, Bakura uses his Millennium ring to find the right path. It is briefly hinted that Yami Bakura, the dark spirit within the ring, begins to take over again as Bakura's expression becomes vacant and detached. After the duel with the Meikyu brothers, Yami Bakura makes contact with Bakura, even though Bakura is not wearing the ring. Yami Bakura reveals that he was the one who guided them through the maze and urges Bakura to put on the ring so that he can help the group escape from the trap set by the brothers. Bakura refuses at first, but Yami Bakura assures Bakura that he only wants to help and that he is now a new person. But Bakura recognizes the deception and resists. However, he changes his mind when Yami Bakura hits him emotionally by hinting that Bakura would lose his friends if he didn't cooperate. This touches Bakura deeply and he gives in. Yami Bakura then masterfully deciphers the Meikyu brothers' trap, showing his intelligence and cunning reminiscent of the Thief King. Even Yugi could hardly overcome this trap on his own. From today's perspective, this moment is particularly exciting. The Pharaoh and Zorc, arch enemies from the past, unexpectedly work together. This not only shows Yami Bakura's uncanny control, but also gives an insight into the depth of Bakura's conflict. Shortly afterwards, Bakura regains control of his body, but is completely unaware of what happened during Yami Bakura's manipulation. The group continues their way and finally reaches Pegasus' castle. There, Bakura witnesses the power of the Millennium Eye as Pegasus uses it against Kaiba, which only intensifies Bakura's urge to find out more about the Millennium items. But that's not all. In the castle, Yugi and his friends discover a painting of Shardi, a man who also possesses Millennium items and has already tested the powers of the Millennium puzzle in the past, much like the ghost in the Millennium Ring. Bakura, who only joined the group after Shardi's appearance, is surprised and realizes that Pegasus probably knows more about the artifacts than he had previously assumed. The painting of Shardi in the castle reinforces his conviction that he can find the answers he is looking for with Pegasus. A conversation about Kaiba and whether they should help him despite his unscrupulous actions at Death Tea comes up. Bakura, who was not present at the time, expresses his point of view. He didn't really know Kaiba before the Duelist Kingdom, but notes that Kaiba must have some good in him despite his arrogance. After all, someone who is completely filled with darkness would never risk his own life to save his brothers. Bakura once again shows his reflective and empathetic side here, as he learns more about the events and characters that played a role before him during the discussion about Kaiba's rescue. What is particularly interesting here is that he seems to understand Kaiba to a certain extent. This brings us to another issue that Kazuki Takahashi's character analysis itself addresses. In a later reprint of the manga, Takahashi published additional information about the psychological traits of some characters. In the 6th volume, there is a diagram that depicts narcissism, mental clarity, and greed in the characters on a scale of 1 to 5. This is where Bakura gets particularly exciting. Yami Bakura has a 3 in narcissism, a 4 in craziness, and a full 5 in greed, making him the greediest character in the series. This fits well with his background as a Thief King, and the high madness is also understandable as he is literally the manifested darkness of humanity. However, Ryou Bakura paints a differentiated picture. He himself has a 4 in narcissism, a 5 in craziness, and a 4 in indifference. This makes him 1 degree more narcissistic and crazy than Yami Bakura is, which is simply shocking. The high level of indifference can be explained by Bakura's acceptance. He is constantly being controlled and manipulated, often losing control of his life and becoming a kind of spectator to his own fate. As long as something only happens to him, he simply lets it happen. This is something we got to see in the Dark Side of Dimensions movie, which we'll get to in a moment. Full marks for craziness reflects Bakura's traumatic experiences, the loss of his family, the isolation by his father, and the dark power that resides within him and robs him of everything close to him. It is precisely these circumstances that make it easier for him to understand other madmen like Kaiba, which is why he is not surprised when Kaiba agrees to risk his life to defeat Yugi. Bakura recognizes parallels to himself in Kaiba's willingness to sacrifice, as he himself would stand up for his friend despite everything, just as Bakura threw away his own life to save his friends in the Monster World RPG. Kaiba was willing to throw away his own life for Mukuba. Now things get particularly exciting when it comes to narcissism. Ryou Bakura is one of the few characters who have achieved a 4 in narcissism, similar to Kaiba, Haga and Pegasus. But how does Bakura fit into the scheme? Narcissism has many facets, and in Bakura's case it manifests itself as positive narcissism, a strong positive attitude towards himself that make him unwavering even in extreme situations. Bakura considers himself a talented player, and nothing, neither personal losses nor Yami Bakura's control, can seriously shake his self-image. Moreover, empathetic traits are not excluded in narcissism, which also explains Bakura's empathy towards Kaiba. Narcissism often develops in people who received little affection, closeness or attention in their childhood. In Bakura's case, he lost his mother and sister in an accident, and his father paid little attention to him and was more interested in the Millennium Ring than in his own son. All of this suggests that Bakura's narcissism is a protective mechanism that arose from the neglect and loneliness of his childhood. If nobody else gives him affection, he's gonna do it himself. It's just fascinating how much subliminal work Kazuki Takahashi has left for us to puzzle together, as well as Yugi with his Millennium puzzle. But so much for that, let's get back to the story. Later, on the night of assigning the matchups for the duels, Yami Bakura steps forward again and stops briefly in front of the painting of Shardy. He comments in his mind that he did not expect to see Shardy's painting here. As a reader of the manga, this scene is cryptic at first, but it makes more sense through the context of the Dark Side of Dimensions movie, where it is revealed that Yami Bakura was Shardy's killer. After saying this, Yami Bakura gives the body back to Ryou, who has no memories of the scene. Later, Bakura discovers that Honda is trying to secretly find the Kaiba brothers and offers him help. However, Honda, who wants to accomplish this task alone, merely asks Bakura to distract the guards, as he considers him the most harmless. But Honda is eventually captured, and to his surprise, Yami Bakura appears outside his cell with a key and frees him. From this point on, Honda becomes wary of Bakura, sensing that the latter doesn't always behave as usual. The two have only managed to find Mukuba until the final duel between Yugi and Pegasus, with no sign of Kaiba. When they get back to Yugi and Co. and talk about the final duel, Honda becomes increasingly suspicious, especially after Bakura dryly remarks during the finale between Yugi and Pegasus that Yugi has to kill Pegasus. Honda begins to suspect that Yami Bakura is taking control, but is still unsure and decides to put the issue to rest, as the threat of Pegasus currently takes priority. In the anime, this scene with Honda, Bakura and the Kaiba brothers was interpreted differently. During the duel between Pegasus and Yugi, Honda set off alone in search of the Kaiba brothers, but was almost captured until Yami Bakura appeared with chain energy and manifested his cards to save Honda. Honda, who finally found Mukuba, was irritated by Bakura's behavior and asked what was wrong with him. Bakura dodged the question and suggested they have the conversation later, as their escape took priority. Later, however, Honda realizes that it is Yami Bakura and asks asks him directly what he is up to. Yami Bakura reveals himself to be the spirit of the Millennium Ring and explains that he needs Mukuba because of the key he swallowed that gives access to important Kuiper Corporation documents. However, Honda outwits Yami Bakura by throwing Mukuba to him, charging at him, and then surprisingly knocking him unconscious. He throws away the Millennium Ring to free Bakura from it, and brings Mukuba and Bakura back to the other friends. After Yugi defeats Pegasus, Bakura wakes up unaware of what has happened. But Yami Bakura takes control again as the ring has reappeared on Bakura. This additional scene with Honda, Bakura and the key is not present in the manga and seems oddly inserted as Bakura keeps the ring anyway and the key theme is never brought up again afterwards. The dialogue has also been changed further in the dub and Yami Bakura wants to use Mukuba as a vessel for his soul in this version, which makes no sense as only certain people can be affected by the Millennium items. For fans who prefer the manga, the anime here feels like a distorted parody that deviates from the original work and misses the subtle character development and Takahashi's intention, but that's just a personal opinion. Back to the manga. After Yugi defeats Pegasus, Pegasus begins to talk about the origin of the Millennium Eye and the dark powers of the Millennium item. Ryou Bakura listens intently, as these items are the reason for his presence. In the anime, however, Bakura has been removed from the scene, which means that his central goal disappears from the focus. Interestingly, Bakura shows no direct reaction to Bakuras story in the manga, although Pegasus describes the same thing that happened to Bakura himself, assuming that Bakura's father died at the time. Pegasus tells of his own disturbing encounter with Shardy, where he had to watch somebody wear the Millennium Ring and die as a result. Afterwards, Shardy forcibly imposed the Millennium Eye on him, just as Bakura had the ring imposed on him by his father. After Bakuras Story, Bakura notices among the friends that Yugi does not seem happy even though he has won. This is because Yugi has realized how strongly Pegasus has been influenced by the evil forces of the Millennium Eye. Bakura expresses some sympathy for Pegasus and mentions that while he may not be forgiven, he is sorry for how he got the Millennium Eye, possibly reflecting his own childhood trauma, again showing how subtly Takahashi has developed the character. Shortly afterwards, we see the group of friends chilling outside without Bakura, and then the scene switches to a dead Pegasus who has lost the Millennium Eye, bleeding at a dueling table. Yami Bakura places the fake Millennium Eye he borrowed from Yugi in front of him and comments that Pegasus can take it to hell with him. Yami Bakura licks the blood from the real Millennium Eye and says that he now has 2 Millennium items and needs 5 more. The scene leaves room for interpretation. Some fans believe that Yami Bakura simply ripped out Pegasus' eye and let him bleed to death, while it can be assumed that the two were playing a game of shadows that Bakura won, similar to what Yugi did to Pegasus. It's conceivable that Bakura uses the same trick, switching between Yami Bakura and Ryou to trick the Millennium Eye. Ryou would probably have allowed this to happen since he recognized the danger posed by Pegasus, and Yami Bakura was able to manipulate him. This would explain why they were sitting at the dueling table and would illustrate how Bakura and Yami Bakura cooperate at critical moments to pursue the goals of both. But of course it could also be that Yami Bakura was able to win the duel just like that, since you can use a Millennium item to ward off the powers of other Millennium items. Bakura finally returns to his friends and claims that he was looking for a ship to leave on. This marks the end of his part in the kingdom of duelists in the manga. In the anime, however, the final confrontation takes a different course. Yami Bakura meets Pegasus in a castle tower and reads his future with the help of his Duel Monsters cards. He prophesies that his lost love and masked present will lead him to hell. The two then engage in a comical laser beam fight with the Millennium items in which Pegasus loses. Bakura snatches his eye, but Pegasus survives in the anime and reappears later. In the manga, however, he dies in the scene. By the end of Duelist Kingdom, Bakura has not only become better acquainted with the Millennium items and their evil intelligence, but also with important characters such as Kaiba and Shardy. Yami Bakura now takes on a greater role in Ryou's life, as he increasingly allows him into dangerous situations, which causes problems for the rest of the story. story. This concludes the Duelist Kingdom, and we turn to the Dungeon Dice Monsters arc, in which Bakura plays a more significant role than in the anime.
さあ、こいつをもう一度完成させるのは君の役目だよ。このパズルがそう願ってるよ。パラサイトマインド封印完了。
In the Dungeon Dice Monsters arc, Bakura's role in the manga once again differs greatly from the anime. While in the anime, Marek controls Bandit Keith and Yami Bakura seals a part of his soul in the Millennium puzzle, the manga shifts this action to the duel with Otogi. But before we get to the first scenes with Bakura, there's a humorous detail. Kazuki Takahashi added an extra page in which he explains a logical error in a game and apologizes for it. To lighten things up, he draws a panel in which Yami Bakura laughs at him and calls him a stupid awful. Takahashi takes up this kind of humor several times. In the Corona period, he tried to design a new dice, but the result reminded him of the virus itself. He then drew Yami Bakura simply eating the Corona dice, because he has a strong immune system. A small side fact that nicely underlines Yami Bakura's evil character and shows how Takahashi simply thinks of Bakura in many situations to visualize them. But let's go back to the story. After the events of Duelist Kingdom, Ryou Bakura is still an integral part of the group of friends. He visits the new game store owned by Otogi's family with Yugi, Anzu and Jonochi. Bakura and Yugi, who are both passionate game fans, are thrilled and spend time there together. But the friends lose track of Yugi and no one knows where he is. Then Otogi challenges Yugi to a game of Dungeon Dice Monsters, with the Millennium puzzle at stake. When Otogi's father breaks the puzzle into pieces, Yami Bakura senses this through the Millennium ring and takes over Bakura's body. In this scene, Yami Bakura hints directly at the events in ancient Egypt for the first time when he mentions that he must do the king's dirty work again. The meaning of the statement is still unclear, but later it becomes clear that he is referring to the pharaoh he once pursued in the past. He sets out to help Yugi, as he is the ideal vessel for the pharaoh and he himself is dependent on him. If Yugi were to be lost, Yami Bakura might have to wait another 3000 years for a suitable host. When Yami Bakura arrives at where Yugi is, he verbally supports him and expresses his admiration for him as the chosen one of the puzzle. He explains that Otogi is unable to put the puzzle together correctly or penetrate the mental labyrinth that is associated with it. Yugi remains suspicious and immediately recognizes Yami Bakura, but the latter assured him that he has changed and is now at Yugi's side. Despite his initial mistrust, Yugi begins to trust Yami Bakura as his actions back up his words. Yami Bakura praises Yugi in almost every sentence, repeatedly calling him the only one who can solve the puzzle and emphasizing him as a great player. This scene shows an interesting parallel to the relationship between Kaiba and Atem, in which respect and recognition also plays a role. While Kaiba always glazes Atem, Bakura always glazes Yugi, which becomes important for the later parts of the story. With Yami Bakura's support, Yugi manages to defeat Otogi and concentrate on putting the puzzle together. Yami Bakura returns the puzzle pieces to Yugi, secretly using Parasite Mind to seal a fragment of his own soul into the pieces, a trick that will be crucial in the final arc. But before Yugi can put the puzzle together, Otogi's father locks him in a security room to seize the puzzle and accidentally sets the house on fire. In the meantime, Yami Bakura has handed control back to Ryou, who is overwhelmed by the dicey situation. Only Jonochi's arrival saves Yugi and Bakura from the flames. Before Jonochi arrives, however, Bakura had tried to help Yugi with Otogi, where Otogi mentions that his father wants to play the Devil's board game with Yugi, which leaves Bakura a bit shocked. It seems like Bakura knows what it is, which would make sense considering he's so into the occult and board games are one of his favorite games. And here I want to drift a bit into the Devil's board game because you can read a lot into it. The only information we have about the Devil's board game is that the game is played by rolling the dice to determine how many steps forward you take, and that you bet a certain number of years of your lifespan at each step. The first one to reach the center wins, and the loser ages the years he bet overnight. Otogi's father said that it aged him 50 years when he played it with Yugi's grandfather. Then we learn about the game that it comes from ancient Egypt and is possessed by a curse, which explains why you age the time you bet overnight. With this information alone, one could already establish a connection to Zorc. First of all, that it's the Devil's board game. Zorc is the closest thing we have to the devil in Yu-Gi-Oh! World. A top-level deity who only wants to cause chaos and darkness and see the humanity that created him suffer. And as we know, it is through the Millennium items that the Shadow games are launched. Since the Millennium items come from Zorc and it is an unwritten rule that you have to enter into a game to fight a battle between two Millennium item bearers, you can make another connection to the board game. Namely, that it is also a game that uses the power of Shadow games. And as we mentioned in the part about Zorc, Zorc has the ability to control time, which will provide another link to the board game. Everything suggests that it could have come from Zorc, that it comes from ancient Egypt, that it is a Shadow game, that it manipulates time, and that it bears the title of the devil himself. But the cherry on top of the cake is the design of the board game. The board is full of snakes, which was already a theme of the Thief King through Dearbound, and is an element that has continued through Zorc with the snake wrapped around his body. You follow the snake in the game, so to speak, until you get eaten away by darkness, which was basically an abridged version of the story of the Thief King Bakura. All this drivel about a side game that Takahashi just threw in to add more connections to ancient Egypt, but all this stuff doesn't seem like a coincidence to me, especially when you consider that it happens in the story section where Bakura first teases something about ancient Egypt and its connection to Zorc. However, the board game never played a role outside of those few pages. The only thing you can do with it in the future is draw a connection to a future element, but we'll get to that when we get to Battle City. At the end of the Dungeon Dice Monsters arc, we see Bakura visiting Yugi and Jonochi in the hospital with the other friends. While the two are recovering and playing Duel Monsters, Bakura and Yugi notice a person in the newspaper wearing a Millennium necklace. This person is Ishizu Ishtar. Yugi and Bakura immediately recognize that it is a Millennium item and know that new secrets will soon come to light. This arc shows some important developments for Bakura. Ryou Bakura remains an integral part of the friend group, deepening his bond with the other characters. Yami Bakura reveals more about his past and gives the first hints that the other Yugi is the pharaoh, hinting at his ultimate goal, to collect the 7 Millennium items and unleash the sealed power of Zorc. Yami Bakura is able to gain a certain amount of trust. Through his help during Yugi's duel with Otogi, he gains some trust from Yugi, and Honda clears up the group of friends around Yami Bakura and says that he has not said anything about it yet because Yami Bakura has behaved unsuspiciously so far. So he also gains Honda's trust to a certain extent. Yami Bakura manages to seal a part of his soul into the Millennium puzzle, which strategically prepares him for the final arc of the story. And in conclusion, it remains to be said that Yami Bakura is not only a powerful antagonist, but also plays an interesting role as a shadow in the background, who quietly pursues his goals in the background, and is not even afraid to mock his own author as stupid author or eat Corona. The Dungeon Dice Monsters arc ends here, and we move on to the next section, the Battle City arc.
今回は俺の負けにしといてやる。だが覚えとけ。俺は必ず蘇り、貴様を殺す。俺はもともと闇そのものなんだからよ。
In the Battle City arc, Bakura's role once again increases in importance, especially through his encounter with Marik in their tactical alliance. Initially, Bakura has little presence and only appears when Anzu and Yugi's grandpa are looking for Jonochi and Bakura joins them as support. Here, Bakura shows his typically nerdy side as he apologizes for being late and explains that he spent the night developing a new script for a tabletop RPG campaign. This little scene could be taken as an innocent mention of his hobby, but it also holds the potential for deeper meaning. After all, we learn later on that Yami Bakura subconsciously led him to create a role-playing game that faithfully recreates ancient Egypt and the events surrounding the pharaoh. This scene could therefore be a subtle hint at the events to come and shows how skillfully Takahashi places clues for Yami Bakura's finale in the background. Bakura then takes on a supporter role for Jonochi's duels and comments in between that he would like to have the cards Jinzo and Insect Queen, as they look very creepy and occult. His fascination with dark cards gives a first hint of his own deck, the exact composition of which will be revealed later. Bakura's curiosity is revealed in another scene. The group meets Doll, a member of the Ghouls and a duelist who possesses the Osiris card and duels with Yugi later on. Bakura watches in fascination as Doll remains in the same position like a doll for over a day. He waves his arms in front of Doll's face and shouts in his face. This comical humor underscores Takahashi's statement that Bakura is the craziest character in the Yu-Gi-Oh universe. As Marik approaches Domino City, Bakura senses the presence of another Millennium item. Yami Bakura then takes control and follows the direction indicated by the Millennium ring. On the way, he overpowers a duelist, steals his duel disc and checks his cards, only to be disappointed to discover that they are not a significant improvement to his deck. In the city, Yami Bakura finally meets Marik. Bakura is immediately curious as to why Marik possesses a Millennium item and demands answers. When Marik hints that he might not reveal anything, Yami Bakura threatens to kill him outright. Marik returns that threat, and so they decide to retreat to a secluded place to talk in private. During the conversation, both reveal their goals. Yami Bakura wants to collect the 7 Millennium items to free the dark power of Zorc, while Marik is only out to kill Yugi. He doesn't care what happens to the Millennium Rod afterwards. Marik informs Bakura that the Millennium items alone may not be enough to achieve his goal, but does not tell him that the 3 God cards are also required. Bakura is shocked by Marik's knowledge and questions who Marik really is and how he got this information. Marik makes Bakura an offer. They could join forces to kill Yugi and Bakura would end up with all the Millennium items. If Bakura refuses, Marik threatens to kill him immediately and gives him 5 minutes to decide. Yami Bakura weighs up the options. On one hand, he doesn't want to enter into an alliance with a stranger who might just be taking advantage of him. And on the other, he actually wants to keep Yugi alive, as he plays a crucial role as host for Atem. But he also recognizes that Marik may have crucial knowledge that he lacks. If Marik is telling the truth and the Millennium items alone are not enough, his efforts so far will be in vain. Finally, Yami Bakura decides on a tactical cooperation and offers Marik to infiltrate him into the group of friends around Yugi, since his vassal Ryou Bakura is part of this group. When Marik asks how this is to be done, Bakura pulls out a knife and rams it deep into his upper arm. He then lets Ryou Bakura take control, who is completely overwhelmed by the pain and can barely keep his senses. Marik realizes the plan. He is to help the injured Bakura gain the trust of the group of friends and thus become part of them. The scene is tragic and brutal at the same time, as Ryou Bakura is physically and psychologically exploited by Yami Bakura and Marik and once again degraded to a tool of darkness. weakness. After Marek gains the group's trust, the injured Bakura is finally taken to the hospital by Yugi's grandpa. After being hospitalized, Yami Bakura breaks out again that same night, determined to qualify for the Battle City finals. On his way there, he faces a series of duelists, including Ghost Kozuka, the little zombie fan and former follower of Bandit Thieves, whom Bakura defeats to grab the 6th localization card. Clues suggest that Yami Bakura may have killed his opponents, a dark suspicion that is ultimately proven true by Kozuka's fate. Interestingly, Bakura seems to have specifically chosen duelists with occult or dark decks. As soon as he obtains the duel disc, he searches his victims' cards for occult elements, apparently to further enhance Ryou Bakura's own deck. After the duel with Kozuka, Yami Bakura even calls his own deck the Super Occult deck, instead of simply the Occult deck as Ryou calls it, suggesting that he strengthened it through these targeted encounters. It's also conceivable that Bakura won the Dark Necrophere card, an iconic card in his deck, in one of these duels. This idea fits perfectly with Yami Bakura's dark aura and shows the Thief King's soul inside of him. With the 6th localization card in hand, Bakura goes to the meeting point of the Battle City finalists. Here, he surprises the entire group of friends who had firmly assumed that he was still in hospital. Anzu, Janochi and Yugi are shocked and ask him confused questions about why he is not being treated and how he made it to the final. Yugi even suspects that Yami Bakura has taken control again, as Bakura seems somewhat absent again. In a remarkable scene, however, Bakura smiles and explains that his wound is not causing him any pain at all, and jokingly suggests Janochi even touch it. This humorous moment initially makes him seem like a funny, carefree Bakura, but it can also be interpreted completely differently. On the one hand, it could be Yami Bakura having fun playing Ryou Bakura's cheerful personality to perfection, allowing us to experience a side of Yami Bakura we have never seen before. On the other hand, the shining light in Bakura's eyes suggests that this is indeed Ryou Bakura, as Marek explicitly mentions that he has manipulated Bakura into feeling no pain. Nevertheless, certain details remain suspicious. Bakura talks casually about his possession of the 6 localization cards, even though he fought the duels to win them under Yami Bakura's control. He also does not reveal how he obtained the duel disc, and talks in riddles about his path to the final. These contradictions suggest that either Yami Bakura still controls consciousness, or that Ryou Bakura's memories have been tampered with, again reinforcing his innocence and the ironic humor of the scene. The group finally boards Kaiba's airship, which takes them to the finale of Battle City. Yami Bakura takes over consciousness and waits with lifeless eyes in the background for the perfect moment to emerge. When the first match of the finals is drawn, it's Yugi and Bakura reacts with unexpected nervousness. This reaction is atypical for the self-confident and self-centered Ryou Bakura, and once again suggests that Yami Bakura is in control. Finally, Yami Bakura reveals himself to the group and expresses his joy at being able to take revenge on Yugi for losing the Monster World game in this duel. The significance of this duel is therefore far greater in the manga than in the anime, as it represents the continuation of the conflict over Monster World, another facet that clarifies Yami Bakura's motivation and reinforces his desire to defeat Yugi. Despite his thirst for revenge, Yami Bakura makes it clear that he does not want to kill Yugi. For him, it's not about turning this duel into a shadow game. Rather, he wants to defeat Yugi in order to secure his God card and exchange it for Marek's Millennium Rod, a clever move to achieve his main goal of gaining control of all the Millennium items. The duel begins with an impressive appearance by Bakura's so-called Super Occult deck, which provides an exciting link back to earlier scenes and confrontations in its variety of dark, occult cards. Bakura's first monster played is the Secret of the Portrait, a clear allusion to the scene in Kingdom of the Duelists, when Yami Bakura looks at the portrait of Shardi. This is a beautiful, subtle detail that references his past and emphasizes the connection to the mystery surrounding Shardi. At this point, we ourselves readers didn't even know the secrets of that portrait. Next, Bakura introduces the gross ghost of fled dreams and the headless knight. These monsters seem neutral at first, but they can be interpreted as hidden references to Yami Bakura's own dark history. The gross ghost is referred to as the nightmare ghost in the original, and ghosts in nightmares are seen as a symbol of warning that something negative will follow, which may be an allusion to the upcoming Millennium World arc. The Headless Knight in ancient legends is a walking undead who causes terror and sends anyone who lays eyes on him to their death with a single touch. Something that can also be easily related to Yami Bakura, who is also a walking soul who wants to send everyone who doesn't suit him to hell, just as he did with all the duelists from whom he won the localization cards, for example. Even if these cards are not clear references to Bakura but are meant to reinforce the occult mood of his deck, Kazuki Takahashi's care shows how masterfully he has embedded Yami Bakura in the dark aesthetics of the occult. Bakura initially steers Yugi into a trap. Yugi destroys the 3 of Bakura's monsters without resistance and takes a large part of his life points, but Bakura has been waiting for this moment. A special summoning condition now comes into effect. If Bakura loses 3 monsters in attack position within 5 turns, he can sacrifice them to summon Dark Necrophilia, which he calls his strongest card. This was the first real special summon to be performed, which is why it was treated as a big deal and even got Kaiba excited. The card Dark Necrophilia clearly refers to Yami Bakura himself. The dark in her name is a synonym for the Yami in Bakura's name, while Necro also appears in Zorc Necrophadis, and fear reflects the occult theme surrounding Yami Bakura. Furthermore, Bakura calls the Dark Necrophilia ruler of the world of the dead, which is a title that can also be applied to Zorc, who had the power to bring back the dead into the world of the living. But it is not only the name and the title that provides references to Zorc, it is also the effect. When the Dark Necrophilia is destroyed, it leaves behind its soul, which takes possession of an opponent's monster without the opponent knowing which monster is possessed. And if the opponent attacks with the possessed monster, he loses half of the attack points of life points, while Bakura gets them on his. This of course reflects the cycle of Zorc. First, that he must be summoned under certain conditions by placing the Millennium items in a Millennium Stone, and that Zorc, after being defeated, could possess Bakura as the spirit of the Millennium Ring, allowing him to harm Yugi's group of friends from within. In addition, Bakura activates the spell card Dark Door, which could be an allusion to the Door of Dark Power that Bakura intends to open in the Millennium World arc. Bakura finally reaches the climax of his super occult combo with the activation of the Ouija board, which we know more as Destiny board, that spells out the word death within a 5-turn countdown and will give him victory. Kaiba is impressed and praises Bakura's strategic use of this powerful setup. While the Destiny board doesn't have a direct Egyptian reference, Ouija boards are meant to communicate with spirits, which can be linked to the Millennium items such as the Millennium Ring and Millennium Puzzle, which allow communication to the spirits of Zorc and Atem. In addition, the Destiny board only works when Dark Necrophilia is in the graveyard, just as Zorc's presence was carried on by the Millennium Ring after his death. Dark Necrophilia also acts when it is banished to the afterlife, a subtle but effective link between Zorc's power and Bakura's card setup. And the Destiny board can also be a reference to the Devil's board game, as a Ouija board can also be considered a board game to a certain extent, and with Dark Necrophilia serving as the reference to Zorc Necrophadis, it's easy to connect. Yugi finally uses the card Monster Reborn, known in the original as Rebirth of the Dead. This card is of enormous symbolic importance to the Pharaoh, as it shows the contrast between rebirth and final death. A central question for the Pharaoh and for Zorc. Bakura panics when Yugi sees through his super occult combo with this card, as it reminds Yami Bakura of the danger the Pharaoh poses to Zorc. But Bakura has an ace up his sleeve, the magic card Deja Vu. which returns all monsters on the field to their positions from the previous turn. This card symbolizes the replay of Zorc's battle with the Pharaoh, as Yami Bakura brings back the old days in the form of the Millennium World RPG, this time to achieve a final victory over the Pharaoh. Yugi nevertheless finds a way to defeat Bakura, bringing the curse of the story to a final climax. Through Deja Vu, Yugi now once again has 3 monsters on his playing field, symbolizing his friends and their unwavering bond. In the final attempt, Yugi draws Osiris, the god card that ends the round and the duel, just as the Pharaoh summons the god Horati in the finale through the power of memories and friendship, who destroys Zorc. Yugi concludes the duel. I just love all the groundwork Kazuki Takahashi put into the Artem and Bakura Zorc conflict. You can tell that he always had a vision of how things should end between these two, and it's also subliminal that you only realize it when you delve deeper into it. Just as Yugi is about to launch his final attack with Osiris, Marek intervenes. He uses Ryou Bakura's consciousness as a lever to force the Pharaoh to give up. He also cancelled the pain resistance, which leaves Ryou Bakura there suffering in agony. Yugi is faced with the possibility that Bakura could be seriously injured or even die if he attacks with the power of a god. The Pharaoh hesitates, which Marek intends to use as a weakness, but Yami Bakura takes the lead and makes it clear that he will not allow himself to be used as a tool by Marek. "I have my own methods of winning, and also methods I hate," he says. This scene shows that despite his sinister nature, Yami Bakura still has a kind of honor that sets him apart from Zorc. It could be seen as the human side that comes from the Thief King Bakura. After the duel, Yugi interprets Yami Bakura's actions as a sign that they resemble each other. Both are spirits of the past, who live in the bodies of the present and wants to protect their vessel. But Yugi disagrees. He doesn't think he did it for Ryou Bakura per se, but because he was worried that Artem would attack Bakura despite the situation and thus kill his vessel. It's true that he didn't do it for Bakura, but he knows the Pharaoh well enough to know that he would never attack him. It was simply an ego thing, if you want to call it that. Bakura simply had no desire to be used and win by the hands of another. The moment Ryou Bakura briefly regains consciousness, he is confused. He doesn't understand why he is in a duel, nor does he know the cause of the pain in his arm. This confusion suggests that it was actually Yami Bakura who had previously taken over Ryou Bakura's role, but you still can't discount the option that Marek's manipulation kept him in this state. I just like the idea of Yami Bakura knowing exactly what makes Ryou Bakura tick, especially since he's also the soul of the Thief King among other things, who was probably relatively similar to Ryou, which is why Yami Bakura was able to recreate it so easily. After the duel, Bakura is brought to the hospital room, unconscious but showing signs of life. His friends are relieved and his injuries are treated. This is the last we see of Bakura until Yami Marek threatens to kill Rishido, and the darkness in the background casts its shadow once more. As Yami Marek was about to kill the unconscious Rishido, he is greeted by Yami Bakura, who is in the same room, still carrying the main personality of Marek. The two have made a deal. Bakura promises to save Rishido, Marek's loyal half-brother and protector, and to destroy Yami Marek. In return, Marek offers him crucial knowledge, the secret engraved in the skin of Marek's back, which is said to be the key to the lost secrets of the Pharaoh. In addition, Bakura is to receive the Millennium Rod, which will advance his collection of the sacred objects. When Yami Marek tries to paralyze Bakura with the power of the Millennium Rod, he is taken by surprise. Bakura effortlessly blocks the attack with the Millennium Ring and confidently emphasizes that a confrontation between the chosen ones of the Millennium items must be decided in a shadow game. So they both begin their way to the roof of the airship, ready for a duel to the death that will banish the loser to darkness. In this duel, the focus is less on subtle hints of symbolism and more on direct revelations and unexpected twists. Marek reveals that he has since learned that the Pharaoh is not responsible for his father's death, as he once thought. It is then hinted revealed that Shardi was the originator of this misinformation. This revelation raises new questions for Bakura, as he was the one who killed Shardi, so how could he have been responsible? And at that time in the manga, we didn't know anything about the past between Shardi and Bakura. It was the second hint that Bakura had a past with him, but it took until the Dark Side of Dimensions movie to get the full scoop. One of the funniest and most disrespectful scenes is when Bakura makes an astute comment about Marik's involvement in his own father's death. When Marik and Yami Marik talk about the guilt they feel for this loss, Bakura gives Marik a disrespectful look and mockingly remarks, "I'm so sorry, father killer." This scene shows Bakura at his rude, cheeky best, emphasizing his dark, sarcastic side, a dark reflection of his unholy spirit. In a strategic moment of the duel, Bakura believes that he can put the divine dragon Ra out of action, but Marik counters and uses Ra's one-turn kill effect, which ultimately defeats Bakura. This defeat is significant. Once again, Zorc in Bakura's role is defeated by the powers of a god, indicating once again that the divine powers are overcoming chaos and darkness. As Bakura dissolves into darkness, it becomes clear that he is by no means defeated. In the end, he threatens Marik that he will not be gone forever. Bakura vows to return and destroy Marik with his own hands, as he himself is the darkness after all. While Bakura was thought to be dead, we are quickly reminded that a part of his soul is sealed in the Millennium puzzle by his parasite mind. This part of Bakura roams the endless corridors of the puzzle, searching for the door of the pharaoh's memories. The silent threat of Bakura remains in the background as he exists in the shadows, awaiting his return. After Marik is defeated in the finale of Battle City, he frees Bakura and Mai from the darkness. Bakura, who regains consciousness, takes care of Mai and shows his kind side. Despite being overwhelmed and suffering, he's right there for Mai, which I think is really nice to see. Yugi and his friends rush to the airship and are relieved to find Bakura unharmed. Bakura seems to have no memory of the events and explains that he only woke up under rubble and immediately took care of Mai. In an unexpectedly humorous scene, Mai and Bakura plan a prank. They trick Jonuchi into believing that Mai had not managed to return to life. Jonuchi is horrified until Mai and Bakura break up the joke and laugh at Jonuchi's reaction. Bakura enjoys these moments of friendship, showing that his ability to bond is stronger than you'd expect from a character influenced by evil. And Bakura has finally found a friend in Mai who shares his dark sense of humor. Despite knowing the dangers, Bakura soon asks where the Millennium Ring is. Yugi hides the ring's whereabouts from him, but Bakura eventually finds it in Yugi's room. In a moment of relief, Bakura puts on the ring and smiles, a moment that emphasizes his narcissistic relationship with darkness. His dependence on the ring and his almost compulsive return to the symbol of darkness is a tragic reflection of his psychological attachment to his lost childhood and the trauma he has never been able to overcome. While the others are still trying to escape the exploding duel tower and find Kaiba, Bakura holds the ring in his hands and seems oblivious to everything around him, be it the danger of the exploding tower or the lost Kaiba. His obsession with darkness and the ring's power over him is more apparent than ever. In the Battle City storyline, it becomes clear that Yami Bakura is getting closer to his goal of using the ancient knowledge and power of the Millennium items to bring Zorc back. He realizes that he not only needs the items, but also the secrets of the Pharaoh. He was able to learn this when he was mentally present in the ring when Marik showed his back at the end. At this point, Yugi has the Millennium puzzle, the Millennium rod and the necklace, while Bakura controls the Millennium ring and the Millennium eye. Only 2 items remain and Bakura is willing to sacrifice everything to achieve his dark ambitions. In the midst of these dark ambitions, the tragic side of Ryou Bakura remains. He has suffered incredible torment that he never deserved, and yet he is willing to carry on, determined to accept the fate that has been thrust upon him. Thus ends Bakura's journey in Battle City, and the stage is set for the upcoming Millennium World storyline. Here, Yami Bakura will finally come closer to his ultimate goal of unfolding Egypt's past and bringing the power of Zorc to the world for good.
これでやっと出てこれたぜ。
This brings us to the role of Bakura in the Millennium World arc of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, although this is only about the modern Bakura and not the King of Thieves from ancient Egypt. The story begins when Yugi notices his 3 god cards being stolen one night. He is unable to stop the thief, but suddenly Yami Bakura appears and overpowers the thief. In this scene, Bakura once again appears as a guardian for Yugi and his precious possessions, just like back in the Dungeon Dice Monsters arc, where he protected the Millennium puzzle. And Bakura points out to Yugi that it is no secret that he possesses the god cards. He therefore warns him to be careful, as others will be prepared to do anything to get their hands on these cards. Bakura throws the box of cards back to Yugi and asks him to check that they are all there. However, Yugi wonders why Bakura is wearing the Millennium ring since it disappeared before. Bakura explains that the ring belongs to him and he can't let it go. He also says that it is surprising that Ryou Bakura seems to have a thieving nature. This statement is interesting again because it emphasizes once more that there's a thief in them, which fits in with the fact that Bakura is the reincarnation of the King of Thieves. But again, this is a bit too simplistic. After all, Ryou Bakura didn't take the ring in order to steal it, he just retrieved the property that was stolen from him, which is basically a small summary of the Thief King Bakura, who, from his perspective, just wanted to get back everything that was originally his. But from the outside, they are portrayed as malicious thieves who only cause problems for others. Definitely a nice little portrayal of that. Then Bakura explains that Yugi needs all 7 Millennium items to open the gate to the afterworld. Once Yugi has the other 6, Bakura wants to give him the ring and presents him with the Millennium Eye of Pegasus as compensation. It's impressive that the Millennium Eye has almost completely faded into the background and oblivion by this point, which makes this moment all the more impressive. Bakura unpacking the eye again at the beginning of the final arc is like a little shock moment that brings you back to reality and makes you question what else Bakura has marinating in the background, which, as you can see in this video, is quite a lot. Before he throws the Millennium Eye to Yugi, he plays around with it the whole time by throwing and catching it again and again. He plays around with it as if it wasn't made of parts of his family. Yugi asks Bakura about the stone tablet of memories and what happens when all the Millennium items are placed on it. Bakura replies that this will open the gate to the afterworld and reminds Yugi that his duty is to bring the pharaoh back there. At the same time, however, he conceals the fact that this will also allow the return of Zorc's dark power. Although Bakura shows himself willing to help, Yugi remains suspicious as he finds it difficult to trust him after the events of Battle City. Nevertheless, he realizes that it is his job to pave the pharaoh's way to the afterlife. Yugi, however, asks Bakura why he is so willing to help. Bakura tries to convince Yugi by emphasizing that he too is a soul of the past and wants to enter the afterlife. It is interesting to note that Bakura cannot fully grasp Yugi. This scene is very interesting because it shows that Yami Bakura still can't fully understand how the modern Yugi thinks. While he can put himself in the pharaoh's shoes relatively well, he can't do the same with Yugi, because Yugi is such a quiet character who is usually in the background. It is difficult to read him. Yugi is for Bakura pretty much what Bakura is for us readers, a mystery doing his thing in the background that you can't 100% figure out, and this point becomes very important in the course of this arc. The final arc is not just a simple fight between Bakura and the Pharaoh, on the contrary. If you look at it all again, the Pharaoh is always inferior to Bakura, and Bakura has full control in this story arc. The exceptions are only when Yugi intervenes. Yami Bakura is not trying to defeat Artem in this arc, but Yugi Muto. And this clash has been built up since the Dungeon Dice Monsters arc, and the dialogue here at the beginning of the Millennium World arc has set the whole thing in stone, which is also why Yugi gets the duel against Yami Bakura at the end. It's all just a subliminal masterclass from Kazuki Takahashi. But let's get back to the story. Bakura says goodbye by announcing that Ryou is really looking forward to their meeting tomorrow, And the next day, Yugi and his friends meet at school, where both Yugi and Bakura were tired from the night. Unfortunately, Bakura has no idea why he is so tired. The difference between Yugi and Bakura becomes clear here. While Atem and Yugi communicate with each other, Yami Bakura simply gets his way without involving Ryou in any way. After school, they meet Bobaza at the museum, who explains the key to recovering the pharaoh's memories. Here, Bakura shows interest and learns that you have to dive into the world of memories. When the pharaoh was finally drawn into the world of memories, Yami Bakura immediately thought about whether there was a way to enter the world of memories as well. What makes the scene so powerful to me is that Bakura was the first to make the response to follow the pharaoh, and Jonochi came right after. Jonochi is Yugi's best friend, and you would completely assume that their bond, which is a theme throughout the series, would make him the first one to come forward. The fact that Yami Bakura beat him to it shows once again why he is the only character who has a 5 out of 5 levels in the category of greed. Being so close to his target made him react faster than the core bond of the story. This can be seen as a subliminal tease that Yami Bakura's power can finally manage to overcome the friendship between the main characters, which he manages to do to some extent, but we'll come to that back in a moment. Bobaza explains that you have to be tested in order to enter the memory world. Of course, everyone has a pure heart and can therefore go ahead, except Bakura, who is completely shocked by this. We've never seen the poor guy so hurt and sad. Yami Bakura has already said during the night how much Ryou has been looking forward to this day, and he also wants to help out the pharaoh, who has become one of his best friends at all costs. Bakura is in tears. He says a sad goodbye to his friends, but tells them to bring the pharaoh back with them no matter what. He then runs away and thinks to himself that he hates Bobaza, a side of Bakura that we've never really seen before. Otherwise, he always accepts any pain and puts up with it. But that just shows again how important the whole thing was to him. This scene alone shows two interesting things. One, you can speculate about what exactly this darkness in Bakura's heart was. I mean, it's the most obvious way to assume that this was simply about Yami Bakura. Both Bobaza and Yugi also have this assumption directly. However, we never get any confirmation of this. It's just questioningly thrown into the room by both of them, which definitely leaves room for interpretation. Ryou Bakura is a peaceful person, but it can be said that his soul harbors a certain amount of darkness, simply because of his traumatic childhood, which he has to consciously suppress. Although the suffering is subconscious, it is still a part of your soul. Every stroke of fate and every influence of Yami Bakura has naturally left scars on Ryou. And not just mentally. In Battle City, Yami Bakura rammed a knife deep into his arm, which was a dangerous injury. And what can also stand for Ryou Bakura's darkness is Yami Bakura's indirect statement from the beginning of the arc, that Bakura is probably a thief somewhere inside, as a reference to the ancient Egyptian Bakura. All this bundled with a 4 out of 5 level narcissism and being the only character with a 5 out of 5 level in craziness in a world where Yami Marek and Kaiba exist can be seen as a point that Ryou Bakura also carries a certain darkness in his heart, apart from Yami Bakura. And last but not least, Kazuki Takahashi indirectly said in the 19th volume of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga remake that Bakura has a dark soul. He said that Yugi was the only one who could really save the pharaoh, as his strength lies above all in his earnestness. If someone had solved the Millennium puzzle who was not as strong-willed as Yugi, the person would have been taken over by the darkness and, as is the case with Bakura, would be responsible for collecting the Millennium items to unleash Zorc. The fact that he uses Bakura as an example here, who was not strong enough to fight the dark intelligence of the Millennium Ring and thus fell into the darkness, can be another clear indication of Ryou Bakura's darkness. The other thing that's interesting about the scene here is Bakura's statement that he hates Bobaza. Bakura was someone who could sympathize with even Kaiba after all the negative information about him. And that we hear that he hates Bobaza of all people, who turns out to be Shardy in the course of the story. Shardy, the person who, along with Bakura's father, made sure that he had to carry the devil himself and go through so much darkness. Shardy is a person you can completely understand why Bakura hates him. It's always these little scenes that happen as you go along, where you don't think you have to think deeper, that often show how much heart Kazuki Takahashi has put into this work. Yami Bakura doesn't mind that Bakura is excluded. He has been informed that you can enter the world of memories through the Millennium puzzle, which makes it perfect that Bakura has sealed a piece of his soul in the puzzle during the Dungeon Dice Monsters arc. The Bakura in the Millennium puzzle will be able to enter the world of memories, while the Bakura in the real world can prepare the Millennium World RPG. So we now have 4 Bakuras in the story: the ancient Egyptian king of thieves, Ryou Bakura, Yami Bakura and Yami Bakura in the puzzle. He is simply the final boss for anyone with personality disorders, and this is where one of the most interesting things comes into play. In the original manga, we see Bakura running away and Bobaza preparing with Yugi and his friends to get into the Millennium puzzle, which gets them into the soul room of the puzzle. And then we see another scene change to the Pharaoh and the Thief King. But what if I told you that 2 pages are missing between these 2 pages? And not because they were simply forgotten, but because Takahashi added them afterwards. After the end of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, it got a new edition in Japan with the Yu-Gi-Oh Bonkobans. And there they simply made some corrections, but also added 2 completely new pages that Kazuki Takahashi really wanted to include. In these pages we see how Yami Bakura comes back into the museum with the black coat, sees the unconscious group of friends and grabs the Millennium puzzle with the words, "Well then, let's start the game." Followed by an incredibly important panel in which we see the ghost of Shardy behind a smiling Bakura. Shardy will also have his own video, so I don't want to go too deep on his side, but here we see that the past is starting to catch up with Bakura bit by bit. First with the replay of ancient Egypt, and then by the ghost of Shardy, who was killed by Bakura back then and still watches over the pharaoh even in death. And what I also find funny is how Yami Bakura returns in his black coat after what feels like a minute. Did Bakura put the coat in his school bag and Yami Bakura briefly replaced his school jacket with the coat, or what happened? But in the end the coat is just damn epic on Bakura, and I wholeheartedly approve of him wanting to dress epically for his final battle. You can only roughly imagine how important these 2 pages were for Kazuki Takahashi. In the new edition of the manga, he talked about how he had a lot of health problems at the end of the story and was given a deadline of half a year to finish the manga. And so he said that he regretted until then that he couldn't show more about the bond between Kisara and Priest Seto, because he wanted to make that a big story point. He does say that it's one of the things he regrets, but instead of using the pages for just that, he uses them for this Bakura scene that gives us another tease of Bakura in Shardy's past, and using that scene to set up how Yugi suddenly ends up sitting with Bakura at the Millennium World RPG. It just shows how important Bakura was to Kazuki Takahashi. Meanwhile, Yami Bakura follows the events in the Millennium puzzle and learns that the final key to opening the gate of the afterworld is the pharaoh's name. Now he has just to wait for the others to find the right door, and then he can fulfill his plan to resurrect Zorc. What starts to be visualized very clearly here is that Yami Bakura looks darker and more devilish every time he gets closer to Zorc. He himself is already casting Zorc's shadow here. It's another nice sneaky detail. When Yami Bakura enters the world of memories, he is clearly at ease as his reputation as the king of thieves spreads fear throughout Egypt. He likes being a famous person. As Yami Bakura's soul flies over ancient Egypt, he regains his memories piece by piece, which he then uses to make his way to the Thief King. When the Thief King has eaten his fill at a snack bar, Yami Bakura just looks at him with complete pride, which I think is pretty damn funny. He loves to see himself doing whatever he wants. You can see this especially when the King of Thieves has slaughtered some people in the snack bar. Yami Bakura just sits down with him, laughs out loud and enjoys the show completely. He acts like the Thief King knows Yami Bakura is there, even though he doesn't. It's just Yami Bakura's soul interfering in the scene for himself and pretending to be part of the scene. This simply shows once again the confidence of victory that boils up in Yami Bakura. Later on, there was a fight between the Pharaoh and the King of Thieves, in which Yami Bakura also didn't want to get involved, because he had already won this fight in the past, and it would be repeated. But then the souls of Yugi and his group arrive, which give the Pharaoh enough power to summon the sun god Ra, with which they manage to kill the King of Thieves. Yami Bakura doesn't like this at all, and immediately afterwards he shows what tragic characters the Thief King and Ryou Bakura are. They all walk a hard path in order to be able to lead a nice life for themselves, but are only exploited by the devil. Yami Bakura complains about the Thief King dying, saying that it wasn't supposed to happen like this and that he should have defeated the Pharaoh, asking afterwards if he could do anything right. Once all is well, he celebrates with the people he shares his life with, but if even one thing goes wrong, he positions himself directly against them, even if it is himself from the past. Yami Bakura finally appears before the High Priest of Darkness, Zorc, before whom he kneels in submission, with the news that Yugi's group have stopped the Thief King. The fact that Yami Bakura is kneeling here in front of someone else is again something striking, because Bakura usually never shows himself submissive. He always stands above others and gets his way, as we saw with Marek, but he kneels before Zorc himself, even though he is also Zorc. This side of Yami Bakura is always so shocking for me to see, but it really shows how he's not just pure Zorc's soul, but also the soul of the Thief King. Once again, the humanity comes out of him. You could see him as a demigod, the way he places himself above every human, but seems rather subservient to a full god, which is pretty damn interesting. Zorc intervenes deeply in events and uses his power to turn back time by taking on the role of fate itself. He lays out the path of the Thief King, and before Yugi and his party can reach the Pharaoh again, Yami Bakura's soul places itself directly in front of them, blocking the way to stop their influence on fate. The group is completely shocked to see Bakura in this form, as no one knew of the existence of his parasite mind. Bakura takes the opportunity to finally reveal his true intentions. Everything that has happened so far has been a complex game with only one goal: to bring about the return of Zorc. Janochi, who immediately tries to push Bakura aside by force, is easily thrown back by him. Bakura coolly threatens that if they insist, they will die and be swallowed up in eternal darkness, just like the Pharaoh. To get past Bakura, they would have to defeat him, and that requires a fight, as is customary for duelists, a duel. Bakura also explains that this world was created from the Pharaoh's memories, and that because of the Pharaoh's strong bond with his friends, they were able to interact with him in the first place. Yugi then asks the central question of who Bakura really is, and here Bakura makes a revelation that shocks everyone. He himself is Zorc, or rather a part of his soul that was sealed in the Millennium Ring. This revelation mirrors one-to-one the scenario from the Monster World RPG, when Yugi, Janochi, Anzu and Honda faced a cloaked man with Yami Bakura's hairstyle. Just like then, the masquerade falls and it becomes clear that the masked Bakura is nothing less than the ruler of darkness, Zorc. As this world is connected to the Pharaoh's memories, the group can manifest items from their present. They summon their duel discs and decks to get ready for the upcoming battle against Bakura. When Bakura provocatively asks which of them would like to be the first victim, Janochi steps forward, resolutely declaring that he didn't survive Battle City for nothing. Impressed by Janochi's courage, however, Bakura makes it clear that this is a real shadow duel. As soon as the life points fall to 0, the loser is erased from existence. No mercy as with Marek, where rescue was still possible. Here, the end would be final. Nevertheless, Janochi remains determined and accepts the duel. What follows This is probably the shortest duel in the entire manga. Bakura places a card and ends his turn. On Jonouchi's turn he activates his trap and summons the dead spirit Zoma with 1800 attack points in attack position. Jonouchi counters with the Panther Warrior, which has 2000 attack, and attacks Zoma, destroying it. But Zoma has a special effect. If it is destroyed, the opponent takes damage equal to twice the attack points of the attacking monster. Jonouchi loses all his 4000 life points in one blow. Jonouchi's duel and therefore his life would have ended here, but at the same moment the Thief King defeats the Pharaoh. This causes the Pharaoh to faint and the world of memory sinks into darkness, and the duel is interrupted. Jonouchi barely escapes death. This confrontation reveals the true power of Bakura. One can argue that Jonouchi is one of the top 3 duelists in the manga. Jonouchi was determined to protect his friends, but was easily defeated in the fastest duel in the story. What Bakura has shown here for the very first time is that you can really break the bond between Yugi and his friends. There's not much focus on that duel at all, but it still proves that Bakura really is the final boss of the story. What's also funny at the end of the duel is that the King of Thieves has succeeded in his mission, but Yami Bakura is still pissed off because he stopped the death of one of his friends. After darkness had fallen, Bakura withdrew for the time being. We only see him again when Akhenaten is about to awaken Zorc. There, Bakura talks to the Pharaoh and explains to him that the world of memories is just a game. The Pharaoh realizes the truth and we switch perspective to Yami Bakura in the real world, where he sits at a table designed like ancient Egypt directly across from the Pharaoh, and explains to him that they are now playing the ultimate darkness RPG, a rematch of the Monster World game if you will. Yami Bakura reveals that they are only in a secret room of the museum, which he has access to because it originally belonged to Bakura's father. He got Ryou Bakura to build the enormous Egypt diorama, and if you think back to the beginning of Battle City, where Bakura was late because he was still working on a new RPG, you can see that Kazuki Takahashi has once again laid the foundations for the finale. The plan had been in the works for a long time. The Pharaoh is boiling with rage when he realizes how Ryou Bakura continues to suffer, but Yami Bakura makes the situation even worse by showing the Pharaoh that Yugi and his friends are also trapped in a world of memories and could die at any time. From this point on, the tension between these two is at a new level. The Pharaoh is about to reach his goal in life, but is stopped by Bakura, who puts his friends in danger, which makes him angry, but Bakura finally comes out of his shell. Until now, he has always been someone who holds back because he has to wait until the right chess pieces are finally in place. But now that he no longer has to take anything into consideration because he only has to defeat the Pharaoh to achieve his goal, he lets out every sadistic bone and dark side he has in him, which you can see from his facial expressions alone. As far as the Ultimate Darkness RPG goes, there's not much new to say. We've already touched on the most important points in connection with the Thieves King and Zorc. Yami Bakura simply explains the game further. Things get interesting when Hassan, who later turns out to be Shardi, turns up to stop Zorc. He, of course, reacts in a very deterred way to him again, which just goes to show how Shardi really is the antithesis of Zorc. Shardi is the wall that keeps popping up in front of Bakura and Zorc, no matter how many times Bakura breaks through it. Hassan reveals to the Pharaoh that his true name is the key to victory. Bakura doesn't like this, of course, but remains calm because he has made sure that the Yami Bakura in the memory world is already where the Pharaoh's name is hidden. Meanwhile, Bakura has left clues for Yugi in the memory world by placing his Ouija board card on the path, a clear sign that he is playing with a new strategy this time and leaving his past behind to finally achieve his goal. What follows is the decisive duel between Yami Bakura and Yugi Muto, who is determined to save the Pharaoh and show his true strength. This duel has been waiting for us since the Dungeon Dice Monsters arc. Since then, Yugi and Yami Bakura have had several confrontations in which Bakura failed to understand Yugi, and this duel shows exactly that, as Bakura had absolutely no idea what strong strategies Yugi could unpack. Although the duel is an important development for Yugi, there are also some interesting things on Bakura's side. Yami Bakura incorporates elements of his own past into his strategies. First, a blind attack that backfires, like the Thief King's first attack or even the Monster World RPG. Then a trap combo that fits Bakura's ability to see through traps and use them to his advantage. His occult cards reflect his time with Ryou Bakura, and a dark curse that destroys his own graveyard and summons spirits is reminiscent of the Thief King and Zorc's sinister abilities to manipulate the dead for their own ends. In addition, Bakura's deck became somewhat of a real deck theme, as he played some cards that had Necro in their names, just like Dark Necrofear, which was also a reference to Zorc. I hope that Konami will eventually turn this deck into a real theme deck and we can have a proper occult Bakura deck in the game. And the last really noteworthy thing in the duel is how Bakura titled his deck, or rather his combo. Namely, it was the Undead Lock. This Undead Lock stood for the situation in which Zorc and the Pharaoh found themselves. They couldn't die, but they couldn't really live either, which is why they were locked in the world as the undead. That's why Yugi was the perfect opponent for his deck, because he will do anything to free the Pharaoh from this undead lock and finally let him rest in peace. That's also the reason why Yugi won in the end. If he hadn't succeeded, he wouldn't have been able to save the Pharaoh, both thematically and literally. Bakura's soul in the memory world dies, and Yami Bakura in the real world feels the pain. The Pharaoh realizes that his friends have overcome Bakura. However, Yami Bakura's diabolical streak is showing more and more, as he has made it look like Yugi and his friends have died. So the Pharaoh has no vessel to return to and will never know his name because no one knows it. However, he then thinks in the back of his mind that he does know his name, but he would never reveal it and the Pharaoh should just die. This once again shows Bakura's malice so close to fulfilling his goal. This was the last appearance of Yami Bakura before the story switches to the final confrontations between the Pharaoh and Zorc. When Zorc is finally destroyed, Yami Bakura is also defeated forever. In the end, all we see is an unconscious Ryou Bakura at the RPG table. Even though Zorc has been destroyed, the Pharaoh wants to take the Millennium Ring with him to protect Bakura and finally give him the peaceful life he has always deserved. Ryou Bakura will also wake up with the news that the Pharaoh has finally been brought back, which he had wished for from the bottom of his heart. And so, now we finally have a liberated Bakura who is no longer mistreated by the darkness and can finally live in peace. For example, we see how he accompanies the main group to Egypt, wants to go to the Egyptian museum with Jonochi out of nowhere instead of waiting for the others, and how happy Bakura can be again when the group has boarded a ship and Bakura simply waves to random people. He seems to have made a few friends in his short time in Egypt without the fear of losing them again, which makes me so happy for him. After saying goodbye to Atem, Shardy Spirit also says goodbye, which shows that he too has now been able to accept Bakura. At the end, everyone in Egypt looks up in the sky together to honor Atem, and Kazuki Takahashi closes the chapter with the message that Atem's story ends here. But this is not the story of the Pharaoh. Everyone has their own story, including Bakura, and their stories end in the light. In the Millennium World arc, so many allusions and preparations have been completed by Takahashi. The Monster World RPG, which revealed Yami Bakura's connection to Zorc. The Kingdom of Duelists, which shaped Bakura's goal after the Millennium items. Dungeon Dice Monsters, which set up the confrontation between Yugi and Bakura. And finally Battle City, which let us look deeper into Yami Bakura's character and set everything up for the Millennium World RPG. All of these elements eventually led to a point where Bakura could finally get rid of the Curse of Darkness. If only we didn't get to the Dark Side of Dimensions movie, which would really round out everything about Bakura.
でも僕はこの手で君たちの大切な人に取り返しのつかないことをしてしまったんだね。
The Dark Side of Dimensions movie came out a whole 12 years after the end of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, and for good reason. Kazuki Takahashi wanted to wrap up open storylines, especially those of Kaiba and Bakura. Bakura's past in particular would have remained incomplete without the movie, and the many hints and tensions between Yami Bakura and Shardy would have continued to hang in the air. So the movie gave us the closure that Bakura and his story deserved. The first scene shows Bakura in the schoolyard, completely overwhelmed by his little fan club. You can even see me in there. I'm every girl you see there. While Bakura is clearly uncomfortable with all the spotlight, I love how many people show him affection. It's something he's had little to no opportunity to experience in his past. The girls even offer him homemade lunchboxes, since Bakura had to fend for himself after the death of his family and is used to cooking for himself, as we learned in Duelist Kingdom. It must feel like a completely new experience for him to be cared and appreciated by others. Such a nice moment for him. Shortly afterwards, the group of friends sit on the school roof and talk about their dreams. Anzu wants to go dancing in the USA. Honda wants to start working for his father's company. Jonochi wants to become a professional duelist. And Yugi dreams of developing his own game and winning a contest in Germany. And Bakura's dream, we don't find out. Bakura remains silent about his own dreams, but you can tell that he totally supports the plans of the others and shares their joy in their goals. He is proud of their ambitions and, for example, would like to try out Yugi's new game with everyone straight away. It also makes sense that Bakura, unlike the others, doesn't state a major life goal. After all, he has already achieved so much in the course of the story that he would probably never have dared to dream of. Friends he won't lose, people he can play games with and trust, knowledge of the Millennium items, and freedom from the darkness that has burdened him. Bakura is living truly free for the first time and is enjoying looking to the future without much obligation. However, it's easy to imagine how he aspires to a similar future to the rest of the group. For example, he could become a game tester in the future, which would allow him to give Yugi a helping hand. That would also fit in with his love of games. However, one can also draw a reference to Honda, who pursues his family's profession. Bakura could perhaps run the Domino Museum at some point. His passion for Egypt will come to the fore again, and so he could continue to accompany Artem. On the other hand, Bakura could also pursue Anzu and work abroad, for example in Egypt, to continue his research there, or look for archaeological references for his RPGs, which he can then play with his group of friends. One possibility that might sound strange at first but makes some sense is that Bakura could work for the Kaiba Corporation in Kaibaland. After all, the reason why Kaibaland exists is to provide orphans with free entertainment, so that they don't have to be alone. Since Bakura himself had to experience the loss of parents and friends, and he could also feel a certain empathy for Kaiba in Duelist Kingdom, it would actually fit in well for me. But one thing that I think will suit Bakura completely would be to be a live streamer, which should be possible in their time, especially through Kaiba. Bakura loves to play games more than anything. He's very open to people and likes to communicate. I could really see him blossoming and then, like Jonochi, trying to make a professional career in his games. Maybe he could become the #1 dueling streamer, since Kaiba was finishing the dueling system at that time. Anyway, there are few possibilities where Bakura would fit in. Afterward we see the group in class, where they encounter Diva, though no one remembers him, which becomes quite significant especially for Bakuras Story. Later, when they talk about the news of mysteriously disappearing people, Bakura explains with a smile how creepy he finds the whole thing, again showing his occult humor somewhat. But then he mentions that he's been feeling watched for a while, which Anzu jokingly blames on his fan club, who are again stalking Bakura in the background. All those fangirls are me! However, a change of scene reveals that it is actually Diva who is watching him, but the reason remains open until then. At the beginning, it seems that Diva's real target is Yugi, which makes sense that the main character becomes the antagonist's opponent. In reality, however, Diva focuses solely on Bakura, whom he holds responsible for Sharding's death. Diva then manages to sneak into the group of friends. Bakura shows his empathetic, open side again here by immediately accepting Diva into the group, even motivating him to duel against Yugi. And in the end, Jonochi, Bakura and Diva were also traveling in a group of 3. What's nice here is that Bakura is chilling with the very first friend he got in Domino City, and at the same time with the most recent one. Later, when Diva starts talking about Egypt, Bakura feels even more of a bond with with him, as Egypt has long been a fascination for him. If they hadn't become enemies, the two could have become really good friends. But then Diva suddenly confronts Bakura with his past, where we get a nice confrontation. Bakura, who doesn't want to remember the past because of the traumatic experiences which he has completely suppressed, and then Diva, who was present at the same event but could never forget it in his life. Bakura represses the memory out of self-protection, while Diva keeps the memories firmly in front of his eyes to use it as drive for revenge. A very nice comparison. We then get the flashback of Bakura that Diva forces out of him. We've already covered this one, but here's the short version. Bakura secretly followed his father, who went in search of the Millennium ring and probably died because of it. Bakura had then put on the ring and thus awakened Yami Bakura, who also kills Diva's father figure, Shadi. Both Bakura's and Diva's lives were destroyed by the Millennium ring, but Diva is so blinded by anger, hatred and the desire for revenge that he doesn't differentiate between Yami Bakura and Ryou Bakura. He tells Bakura that he should finally show his true colors. Bakura tries to make him realize that it was because of the Millennium ring, but Diva completely denies it until he sees Bakura burst into tears and understands that he must have done something bad that he can never undo. This scene of Bakura always makes me so emotional. He realizes that Yami Bakura has harmed others so badly that the damage could never be repaired, and he blames himself for it. On top of that, there's the selfless empathy that he has for the problems Yami Bakura has caused him. He has literally lost everything because of him, but just puts it away and tries to deal with it as best as he can without blaming anyone, while being full of self-blame and pity when the same thing has been done to others. Bakura is such a wonderful character. Diva's hatred begins to crumble through Bakura's tears. He completely questions what's going on, because he didn't expect the devil himself to show compassion, full of tears and understanding. Diva is questioning everything at the moment. He doesn't know where to put the hate, but he realizes that going after Bakura for it is not the right thing to do. Just as he realizes that his hatred towards Bakura is not justified, Mani, who has been possessed by the darkness of the ring, shows up and attacks Bakura. This despite the fact that Mani was previously against Diva even starting his revenge campaign. This makes Diva realize even more that the ring is the problem. He wants to stop Mani, but he couldn't. Bakura doesn't fight back and lets the attacks wash over him, ready to take any consequence for Yami Bakura's actions. Eventually, however, Mani loses control and is consumed by the darkness, which banishes him and Bakura to a lower dimension. Diva leaves Bakura in the lower dimension as he can no longer judge what is right and wrong due to the death of Mani and his hatred of the Millennium ring. Later, Yugi intervenes to save Bakura and manages to get him back, just in time for a duel between Yugi and Kaiba. You can imagine what an emotional up and down this must be for Bakura. Just full of self-reproach and guilt, then seemingly obliterated, only to suddenly find himself in a stadium full of friends and a thrilling duel between Yugi and Kaiba. Bakura has been through the most intense roller coaster here. At the end of the movie, we see how Bakura is a little jealous of Yugi and Jonuchi because they were able to see Atem once again. Shortly after, everyone says goodbye to Anzu, who flies off to the US, and there seems to be a real happy ending. Kazuki Takahashi even made sure to put Bakura in the outfit he gave him in the 10th volume of the manga reissue, a small detail that I think is very nice. Through the movie, Bakura has not only found peace, but also finally the freedom to choose his own path. And to round off the video, a little quiz question about Bakura. What color are Bakura's eyes? A. Brown, B. Blue, C. Purple, or D. Red? You are exactly right, because no matter which answer you choose, it was correct. Here's the interesting thing about Bakura's eye colors. They are completely inconsistent, because no medium can agree on them, which is why, in principle, any eye color can be considered correct. Even if you go by Kazuki Takahashi himself, it's difficult, because he likes to play around with eye colors. For example, he stylistically changed the eye colors of Yugi in many colorized pages. From Takahashi himself, we got the following eye colors for Ryou and Yami Bakura: blue, turquoise, yellow, brown, and a pink-purple mix. If you want to go by the last official work Takahashi released regarding Bakura, it will be the Dark Side of Dimensions movie, for which he also did the character designs. There, Bakura has this pink-purple mix as his eye color. If we go by the last image of Bakura that Takahashi released for Bakura, it's more blue-grey eyes. This picture came in 2020 when he let Bakura eat the corona dice. And if you go by what he used the most in the manga, it's also the blue eyes. That's also what the people who were responsible for the official coloring of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga thought, since Bakura was always painted with blue eyes there too. In Duel Links, however, we see Bakura with reddish eyes, among others. And if we want to go back even further with the Season 0 Toei anime, Yami Bakura has bright purple eyes there, while Ryou Bakura has bright green eyes. Bakura really just ran through every eye color. There were no complications with the King of Thieves because everyone agreed that he had purple eyes. Even Takahashi was consistent in that regard. But that's it for the video. Thank you very much for watching this movie. Please let me know in the comments if I was able to change or expand your view on Bakura, because he really didn't get much focus in the anime, even though he was such a deep and important character in the manga. It would mean the world to me if you liked this video and shared it with other Yu-Gi-Oh fans, so we can spread the Bakura greatness. That's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. UTS!